Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Konoha leads to a near-fatal encounter for Naruto on the night of the Genin exams. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. In the shadows cast by the full moon, two adults crept under the cover of the looming fortress walls of the city hidden in the leaves. Inside the walls, many of the citizens of the shinobi village of Konoha were settling down for the night. A number of families were happily celebrating the graduation of their children from the ninja academy and into the rank of Genin. The one child that hadn't passed was no longer within the village walls. "Is it done?" a woman's voice asked. "A complete success. We can head out after him in a few minutes. Right now the Hokage has shinobi looking for him, but no one will be able to find him before us," a male boasted. "Then perhaps you should hurry before the Hokage sends actual trackers after the boy," another woman interrupted from the shadows behind them. "What are you doing here?" the man asked. "Making sure the two of you don't mess this up. Remember, the Jinchuriki needs to be eliminated. After that the scroll of sealing should be taken directly to the meeting point," the second woman informed them. "We know, we'll take care of it. This plan can't go wrong," the first woman assured. "Then get going," the second woman ordered. In the shadows cast by the full moon, two people scowled before taking off after their target. Iruka arrived at the clearing to find an exhausted, battered, yet surprisingly enthusiastic Naruto. The boy showed no fear or guilt after having attacked the Hokage and stolen the forbidden scroll. The fact that, as an academy student, Naruto believed he had been able to master one of the techniques housed within that scroll was even more amazing, and a bit frightening. "Oh, this? Mizuki-sensei told me about it. And this place too." Naruto enlightened him before once again stating his intention to graduate using the new skill he had learned. The moment Naruto had mentioned the other sensei, Iruka had stopped paying attention to the boy. He jumped back to attention just in time to shove his student out of the way of the oncoming projectiles. Iruka felt himself thrown back against the small shack in the clearing, but he ignored the pain and instead turned to pinpointing the location of the attacker. Mizuki was sitting smugly in a tree at the edge of the clearing. I didn't expect anyone to get to him before I did," Mizuki stated, looking appraising between the sensei and his student. "This will cause a small hitch in my plans. I was just going to kill Naruto and send the scroll off. Nobody would have missed the brat anyways. Now it looks like I'll have to kill both of you. It'll be difficult for me to get out of this without catching any suspicion," he pondered aloud. Naruto was staring at Mizuki with horror. Iruka could see the understanding and belief flash through his eyes as he considered Mizuki's words. "Naruto, whatever you do not give up that scroll," Iruka ordered his student. "Why should he listen to you?" Mizuki asked, looking over at Naruto. Let you in on a secret, brat," he began. "Iruka hates you as much as the rest of the village." "Would you like to know why?" Naruto's terrified face faltered slightly, betraying his curiosity. "Don't," Iruka shouted at Mizuki. When Mizuki smirked at Naruto, Iruka shouted, "Get out of here, Naruto." Naruto didn't listen to him. Instead, Iruka could tell that the boy's attention was fixed firmly on Mizuki and the answers that he had always wanted. "The reason they all hate you, 12 years ago when the Kyuubi was sealed, it was sealed in you. You're the one that caused all the pain and suffering in this village. Iruka's parents and so many others, you killed all of them. You're the Kyuubi," Mizuki stated. Naruto's face scrunched up in confusion as he tried to decipher what Mizuki had told him. As he fit all the pieces together, his entire demeanor darkened, causing Mizuki to smirk in pleasure. Iruka's mind flashed back to the meeting with the Hokage earlier that afternoon. Naruto didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to lose every ounce of faith he had managed to build inside the village. Iruka reacted as quickly as he could when he saw Mizuki ready one of his larger shuriken. He managed to shield Naruto, but not without the shuriken becoming lodged in his back. "Get out of here," he grunted through the pain. Naruto looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes before his face once again hardened. This time, Naruto nodded and grabbed the scroll before heading out of the clearing. Iruka stood up a bit shakily and lunged at Mizuki. If he could hold the other Chunin off, then Naruto stood a chance of making it back to the village relatively unharmed. Unfortunately, Mizuki simply smirked and dodged Iruka's sluggish attack. "You're slow, and if you honestly think you'll get away then you need to re-evaluate the situation," Mizuki claimed. Iruka's eyes widened, but he didn't slow his attempted attacks. He pulled out several kunai and launched them at the other sensei. Mizuki easily deflected and dodged the first wave, but he wasn't paying enough attention. The second group of kunai that Iruka sent at him had more success. Mizuki grunted and hunched over slightly, trying to remove the 2 kunai that was embedded in his calf. He yanked one of them out and launched it furiously back at Iruka. Iruka dodged the hastily thrown retaliation and prepared to attack again when Naruto landed back in the middle of the clearing. Iruka looked at the boy in confusion. "What are you doing?" he hissed to the younger boy. Naruto stared at the edge of the clearing. He clutched the scroll a bit tighter but showed no signs that he had heard Iruka. The Chunin realized why when, a moment later, Mizuki's smirk widened and young woman walked into the clearing. "I'm surprised it took you so long, Kimiko," Mizuki stated. "The kid's not bad when he's panicking," the young woman responded. "Whatever, let's finish this and get out of here," Mizuki snorted, looking at Naruto with disdain. "Our plans have already been botched enough," he added. "Right," Kimiko responded, gazing between Iruka and Naruto. "Give me the scroll, Naruto," Iruka ordered, holding out his hand towards Naruto. Naruto snapped his attention onto his teacher, but it took his mind a moment to catch up to the situation. When it did, Naruto quickly scrambled to his feet and handed Iruka the scroll. Before Iruka realized what his student was doing, Naruto had placed his hands together and shouted, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." His eyes widened when he saw nearly 20 copies of his student appear, surrounding the 2 of them. Iruka bent down so that he was more securely hidden amongst the clones. When he was out of sight, it took just a quick flick of his wrists and instead of Iruka, another Naruto was crouching on the ground. The scroll was nowhere to be seen. "Screw this," Kimiko cursed. "We need to just get rid of all of them. Find the scroll first and make sure it isn't damaged," she ordered. Mizuki nodded and launched an oversized shuriken into the congregation of blondes. One of the clones disappeared, but the rest jumped into action. Kimiko cursed a second time, as 5 clones lunged at her, each armed with multiple kunai and shuriken. "Raiko Funsai no Jutsu," she shouted, holding her hands in front of her with both palms facing out. An arc of lightning shot from her palms, decimating the 5 clones in front of her as well as 4 more behind them. She couldn't risk using that jutsu as the numbers dwindled for fear of destroying the forbidden scroll. While Mizuki was engaged in physical combat with 3 more clones, she gazed at the remaining 9 Narutos trying to distinguish the clones from the others. Unless Iruka had managed to escape, then one of the blonde brats had to be the sensei. It was most likely that that clone was the one hiding the scroll, she just wasn't quite sure what he had done with it. Her thoughts were interrupted when 3 of the waiting Narutos lunged at her, weapons drawn. She immediately dispatched 2 of the clones with a quick punch. Kimiko was about to turn to her third when Mizuki appeared behind it. A quick chop to the back of the neck and the clone disappeared in puff of smoke. "We're wasting too much time playing with these pieces of trash," Kimiko growled. "Just take them out," she added. Mizuki grinned menacingly and jumped at the remaining 6 figures still standing in the middle of the clearing. As he lunged forward, 2 of the figures dove for the trees at the side of the clearing. Kimiko followed the one that had gone to their left, and coincidentally towards the village. Mizuki eliminated the remaining 4 clones, before turning to go after the Naruto who had jumped into the trees on his right. Kimiko easily caught up with Naruto. The boy had abandoned the trees and was racing along the forest floor towards the village. She jumped out of the tree and sprung towards Naruto. Naruto fell face first into the dirt when the older woman landed on his back. "Well, that means you aren't a clone," Kimiko replied smugly, when the body underneath her feet didn't pop away in a puff of smoke. "That means you're either the Kyuubi's host, which means I get to kill you, or you're the sensei in disguise, which means I get to kill you and then take the scroll," she added, when Naruto squirmed a bit so that he could glare up at her. "Don't touch Iruka-sensei," Naruto shouted rather foolishly. Apparently Kimiko thought it was foolish as well. She stood up rolling her eyes and allowed Naruto to get back up. "You're just an annoyance that I need to get rid of," Kimiko stated coldly, causing Naruto to back up a bit nervously. Despite his nervousness, Kimiko's earlier statement rang true. Naruto wasn't bad when he was panicking. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," Naruto shouted. Kimiko was immediately surrounded by 50 clones. "Well, that's impressive," she deadpanned, looking around at the group surrounding her. Unfortunately for you, I'm not a pushover. I also have no reason to go easy on you, since we want you dead, she informed him. Naruto didn't falter for a moment. The clones ignored the statement and lunged forward at the enemy shinobi. Kimiko easily dodged the sloppy and unorganized attacks from the clones. After a moment she grew restless and once again began forming hand seals. She paused mid-seal and swung her head to the left, completely forgetting about the onslaught of clones. Two of the clones managed to land punches to her stomach, another lodged a kunai deep in her left thigh. Kimiko fought the urge to scream, when the hits brought her back to her main focus. Lucky brat, it seems like that Hokage of yours finally sent someone else out after you, she growled at him. Unfortunately for you, they aren't going to get here in time. The foreign shinobi repeated her earlier jutsu, easily getting rid of the remaining shadow clones that hadn't been able to get out of the way. Without his shield of clones, Naruto was left wide open to attack. Kimiko restarted a new set of seals. After she finished the last one hand went to the pouch on her hip and another to her mouth. She inhaled deeply and muttered, "Piri piri koki," before breathing out. A deep gray smoke flew out from her lips and began to fill the clearing. The last thing Naruto saw was Kimiko placing a gas mask over her face. He immediately brought his hands up to his mouth and nose, hoping to keep from inhaling whatever she had spread through the air. When he felt cold metal touch the side of his neck, his eyes widened as the blade bit into the side of his neck. He managed to move out of the way after the fist cut on the left side of his neck. When a second kunai sank into the right side of his neck, Naruto opened his mouth and screamed. His hands immediately flew up to his neck and he gagged as he breathed in the noxious air around him. "Enjoy the last few moments of your life," he heard a muffled voice say before a third kunai was once again driven into the left side of his neck. Kimiko left the site quickly. She could feel a shinobi, probably Junin level, closing in on her position fast. As she made her way back to Mizuki, she hoped he had gotten rid of the other sensei and found the scroll of seals. The clearing they had occupied earlier was empty, so she took a brief moment to orient herself before taking off after Mizuki. She found him about half a kilometer away. The sensei was on the forest floor unconscious, and Mizuki was rooting around the area. The scroll was nowhere in sight. Did he have it? Mizuki asked when she walked up to him. No, it wasn't anywhere in the area, she answered, but he is dead. Iruka didn't have it either, Mizuki stated, gaining a bewildered look from his companion. Kimiko was about to retort when she sensed several people heading towards the clearing. Damn, we're in trouble, she muttered. At least 3 shinobi, probably Junin, are heading this way. If we stay, we'll be caught. We can't go back without anything, Mizuki countered. The kid's dead. That'll be enough for now, Kimiko claimed. We need to leave now, she added, taking off. Mizuki glanced back once, wishing he had something to show for all their trouble. That brat's death wasn't satisfying enough for all the work they had put into the operation. The Junin cursed when he entered the small area and found nothing but a haze. The Hokage had told him that the boy would be here. Now he just had to get rid of whatever substance was in the air. It was very likely that it was poisonous. He wasn't sure if the boy would be able to stand poison, even with any recuperative abilities the Kyuubi gave him. A quick wind jutsu cleared the area and he cursed when the fleeing fog revealed the boy's prone figure on the forest floor. Hopefully Naruto's sensei hadn't met the same fate, but that wasn't his responsibility at the moment. His orders were to bring the boy back to Hokage Tower where he would be treated. The Junin gave the boy a quick once-over and was relieved to find him still breathing. The blood that he occasionally coughed up and the gurgling noise that accompanied his breathing was disconcerting, but as long as he continued breathing there was always a chance that the medics would be able to take care of him. He gently hoisted the boy onto his back and took off back towards the village. If what the Hokage had said was true, this was going to cause a lot of problems. And not just for the 12-year-old in his arms. He's waking up, Hokage-sama, a young medic Nin stated. The Sandaime Hokage nodded his head wearily and dismissed the girl. By the time Genma and Anko had found Iruka, he was unconscious and severely wounded. The scroll and the attackers were nowhere in sight. He had known that they wouldn't catch Mizuki and the other shinobi, but he also knew that they hadn't taken the scroll with them. He needed Iruka to wake up so that he could tell the Junin where to find it. A moan from the hospital bed reminded him of the nurse's words and he turned to find Iruka attempting to rub his eyes. The bandages on his arm hindered his movement, so the sandaime reached over and pushed his arm back down. Try not to move too much. Quick movements could damage the stitches in your back. A medic will heal them in a bit, but they wanted you to recover a bit first, he informed the academy sensei. Iruka opened his mouth to ask a question but stuttered because of the dryness of his mouth. Sandaime handed him a glass of water and Iruka took a sip before asking again, "Where's Naruto?" "He's recovering as well. I need to ask you a few questions," Sandaime said before he cut himself off. Iruka was shaking his head. What happened to him? He was fine when he took off, he muttered. The other shinobi? Sandaime was once more cut off. She was from Kumo. Mizuki called her Kimiko, Iruka told him. Sandaime stared at him for a moment before sitting back down and sighing. Missing Nen? He asked. Not likely, her forehead protector was untouched, Iruka answered. Mizuki-sensei was working with her? He inquired, gaining a nod from Iruka. They were after the scroll? He added. Yes, but it sounded like they were after Naruto as well. He knows, Iruka informed him. Mizuki blurted it out. I'm not sure how he'll take it once he has the time to realize what Mizuki told him, he added. Sandaime dropped his head into his hands and rubbed at his eyes. Where is the scroll? Sandaime finally asked, remembering his initial reason for visiting the Chunin. Iruka blinked and looked up at him. It's hidden near a clearing in the woods. One of Naruto's clones hid it in a tree, he answered. Will we need to wait for Naruto to find it, or can you show them where it is? Sandaime asked. I can show them, but I'd like to see Naruto first, Iruka answered. Of course, Sandaime responded, standing up. I'll get a nurse to release you, he added, walking out of the room. Several minutes later Iruka heard the Hokage arguing with a nurse outside the room. After a minute or two, the nurse entered the room huffily and began to rewrap his bandages. When she was finished she stood up and looked at him sternly. Try not to exert yourself too much for the next several days. Hokage-sama is forcing us to release far earlier than we should be, so try not to re-injure yourself, she told him. When the nurse walked out, Sandaime re-entered and helped Iruka stand back up and get ready to leave. As they exited, Iruka noticed a Junin lounging against the wall across from his room. Sandaime waved the woman along and they made their way to the Hokage tower. Anko, wait here. When we get back, Iruka will show you where the scroll was hidden, Sandaime ordered as they passed his office. They turned down a smaller hallway not far from his office. Sandaime nodded to the silver-haired Junin leaning against the wall and then pushed open a door on his left. Iruka ignored the Junin, only sparing a moment to glare at the book in his hand, and entered the room alongside the Hokage. He didn't see the wary look the Junin cast him as he entered. Iruka looked at the unconscious figure at the bed in confusion. Naruto showed no signs of injury. His face, which had been bruised and scratched even before Mizuki arrived, was now completely flawless. Naruto had always healed rather quickly, but he had never seen it happen in under a day. He suddenly looked up at the Hokage and asked, how long was I out? Barely 12 hours, the attack took place last night. All outward signs of his injuries were the first things to heal, Sandaime said, answering Iruka's unspoken question. Then why is he still unconscious? What happened to him? Iruka asked. We won't know for sure until he wakes up. When Kakashi found him, the woman had created some type of poisonous cloud that was surrounding him. I've seen jutsu produce similar effects, but we weren't able to identify the poison. He also had several wounds on his neck, Sandaime explained, walking over to Naruto. He pushed the sheet down enough that Iruka was able to see 3 rough-looking scars along Naruto's neck, 2 parallel ones on the left side and 1 on the right. We think the blades were poisoned as well. It's the only explanation we've come up with for the scarring. It's likely that even those will fade within a few weeks. You're not telling me something, Iruka stated, looking at Naruto nervously. Between the effects of the poison and the 3 stab wounds on his neck, Naruto has been left with a permanent disability, Kakashi informed him, walking into the room from where he had been loitering and eavesdropping in the hall. The medic that healed him couldn't get to the internal injuries in time. He thinks the Kyuubi's power may have focused on healing the external aspects that were directly threatening Naruto's life. What do you mean? Iruka asked, turning back around to stare at Kakashi. The cloud must have been made from some sort of caustic substance. His throat and lungs seemed to have suffered from severe burns. The stab wound to the neck severed a nerve of some sort. It affects the vocal cords. None of the medics currently in Konoha have the ability to repair the main damage, Kakashi explained, scratching his head. For all his intelligence, he hated it when medics talked over him. He had had to make the man explain Naruto's injuries 3 times before he had figured out what the man was telling him. Vocal cords? Iruka muttered, turning back to Naruto in horror. His words directly, his chances of regaining his ability to talk are about as high as the chances of all 3 Sannin returning to Konoha, Kakashi quoted. Sandaime sighed as Iruka attempted to digest everything that Kakashi had told him. Naruto isn't supposed to wake up for another few hours. I know you probably want to be here when he does, but we need the scroll back within the city's walls. If you leave with Anko now, you'll be back in time, he informed him. What? Iruka stuttered, turning back to the Hokage. The scroll of sealing, we need to bring it back into the village. You know where Naruto managed to hide it, Sandaime reminded him, bringing Iruka out of his stupor. Right, Iruka murmured. He gave Naruto one last glance before turning and leaving with the Hokage. Kakashi remained behind, settling down in a chair near the boy's bed and pulling his book back out. As Iruka and Sandaime made their way back to the Hokage's office where Anko was waiting for them, Sandaime paused and turned to Iruka. For now, no one but me, Kakashi, you, and the medic that treated him know of Naruto's injuries. We have reason to believe that if Mizuki was working as an insider, others may be as well. Anko is under no circumstances even suspected. However, it would be best if news of Naruto's accident do not make it to the public, and she does have a bit of a loud mouth, he explained. Iruka nodded dumbly and entered the Hokage's office ahead of him. The 2 of you should head out, Sandaime said, walking over to his desk. When you've found the scroll, bring it straight back to me, he ordered before dismissing them. Once the 2 had disappeared, Sandaime shuffled through the folders on his desk for a minute before grabbing 3 folders and heading back to Naruto's room. He slid inside, careful not to disturb the quiet atmosphere of the room. Nothing's changed in the 5 minutes you've been gone, Kakashi remarked wryly. Naruto is being put on your team along with Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura, the Sandaime informed him, pulling up another chair to sit on the other side of Naruto's bed. So you want all 3 sent back to the academy? Kakashi joked. You won't have the chance to send them back. Team 7 will be given an automatic pass. The council will go along with it because they would prefer that Sasuke work with the only other Sharingan user in Konoha, Sandaime countered. Kakashi sighed and put his book away. I don't have a choice, do I? He asked. I think you'll enjoy this team. Naruto will struggle a bit to recover and accommodate for what he has lost, but from what I saw when he went up against Mizuki, you'll be in for a number of surprises. Sasuke is talented, but he needs to be redirected. He is far too focused on revenge. Naruto may also need to be steered away from revenge as well. It all depends on how he takes the news when he wakes up, the Hokage told Kakashi. What about the last one? Kakashi asked. Haruno Sakura is a very bright girl. However, she lacks practical experience and some of her more physical skills have been neglected. The biggest problem your team will have is learning to overcome their obstacles and work together. All 3 are very independent and Naruto and Sasuke don't get along very well, Sandaime explained. So you gave me the 3 misfits. They were put on a team together because anywhere else and they would have messed up the chemistry, Kakashi said. Individually they may have worked in other teams, but the students that were ousted to make room for them would not have been able to form a coherent team. You were given these 3 because you will be able to use their individual talents and help them work together. Sasuke's Sharingan hasn't been activated yet, and right now he is the only one who knows any jutsu aside from those learned in the academy. You have the chance to hone their skills nearly from scrap, Sandaime explained. You failed so many teams because none of them fit the mold you wanted them to. With this team you'll have the chance to remold them into it. There's nothing to stop them from becoming an excellent team with excellent teamwork and individual talent, he added as Kakashi's confidence began to waver. That'll be difficult if Naruto and Sasuke carry a negative history over onto the team, Kakashi stated. That will be taken care of. You won't be the only one working with them, Sandaime said. What's that supposed to mean? Kakashi asked. Naruto will not be able to remain on his own. With this disability he'll be left without the means to summon help should he need it. Sasuke has been descending ever since his clan's massacre. He may well become a danger to himself. I believe that Iruka can be convinced to take them in, Sandame stated. You're shunting two possibly unstable teenagers onto a charitable Chunin, Kakashi stated in awe. I believe that he would have taken Naruto in earlier had it not been for the conflict interests presented. Taking in both Naruto and Sasuke will allow Iruka to maintain a connection with two of his favorite students. He would have remained watchful of their teaching regardless, Sandame clarified. Kakashi rubbed his head in irritation. So my job is to make sure that the girl can fit into this equation, and make all three of them stronger, he said. Basically, you should also know that you'll need to work them a bit harder than most Junin sensei would. Because of the automatic pass, they'll be judged slightly harder to assure that they deserved it. If news of the pass makes it out to their peers, they may be required to prove themselves in a completely different arena. The change will need to be noticeable, Sandame claimed. So instead of fostering a couple of brats who want to become Chunin and make their families proud, I'm supposed to create 3 shinobi, Kakashi reasoned. Yes, Sandame answered. Kakashi sighed once more before giving in. Let me see their files. Sandame pulled out the 3 folders he had slid into his robes and handed them to the Junin. I'll speak to you a bit more once Iruka has returned, he said, slipping back out of the room. Kakashi pulled out the folders and began reading. That was Iruka found him 2 hours later when he returned. He slipped into the room and sat down in the seat the Hokage had abandoned several hours earlier. How is he? Iruka asked hesitantly. Kakashi finished reading the last of Naruto's file before placing it down and turning back to Iruka. Nothing's changed yet. The medic came by about half an hour ago. Naruto should wake up within the next hour or so. If he doesn't, then his theory about Naruto's coma was wrong, and he doesn't know what's going on, Kakashi reassured Iruka half-heartedly. Iruka looked at him in bewilderment before dropping his head into his hands helplessly. Tactful as always, Kakashi, Sandame muttered, entering the room as well. The medic believes that Naruto is regaining the strength he used last night, as well as taking the time to recover from the extensive healing that took place, Sandame explained. Iruka looked up, nodded wearily before sending Kakashi a weak glare. Sandame chuckled lightly before pulling up the last free chair in the room and taking a seat near the foot of the bed. I only have a short time before I need to return to my office. I have a meeting with the elders tonight to discuss Kakashi's team, he explained. What? Iruka asked. Tomorrow we'll need to meet to put together the other Genin teams before they meet for orientation next week. However, I have already put together one team. Kakashi will become the sensei for Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura. Unless you can think of a better third for that team, Sandame explained. How is Naruto being placed on a team? I mean, if he had passed he would have been placed on the same team as Sasuke anyways because of their class standings, but he failed the exam and now, the injuries. Iruka trailed off in confusion. Mizuki told Naruto that if he managed to steal the Forbidden Scroll and learn one jutsu he would pass. I intend to uphold that promise despite Mizuki's betrayal, Sandame claimed. However, he cannot go on as he was. For now we'll keep his injury under the radar, but if someone with a grudge were to discover it they may try to take advantage of it. Because of that I don't want Naruto to remain on his own. If he is, he will be an easier target, the Hokage continued. He can stay with me, Iruka responded without hesitation. I was hoping you'd say that, Sandame said. Any further discussion was interrupted when the form on the bed began to stir. I'll leave you with him for a while, Sandame said, looking at Naruto as he began to stir. I'll be back later tonight to speak with him. You can explain the situation to him if you feel comfortable enough to do so, otherwise, I will do it when I return. Iruka barely nodded and refused to take his eyes off of Naruto as Sandame closed the door behind him, leaving Kakashi with Iruka and Naruto. Iruka shifted his chair closer to the bed as Naruto's hand twitched. Without warning, the blonde shot up in the bed, gasping for air. It must be a reaction to waking up after the poison, Kakashi muttered, trying not to alarm Iruka. The last thing he remembers is not being able to breathe, so he's compensating for it, he added. Iruka moved to sit on the edge of the bed and placed his hands on Naruto's shoulders, trying to calm him down. Calm down. You might reopen the wounds on your neck, Iruka lied, trying to convince Naruto to stop panicking. Naruto immediately stilled as he recognized the figure in front of him. He opened his mouth to ask what happened, but Iruka stopped him. "Don't say anything right now," Iruka stated, trying to avoid the inevitable explanation that would have to come when Naruto realized he didn't have a voice. Mizuki and his partner escaped, but they didn't manage to find the scroll. "We retrieved it earlier today, so it's back in Hokage Tower," he explained. Naruto nodded after a moment and gazed around the room in confusion. Once more Iruka interrupted him before he could ask questions. "Kakashi found you last night and brought you here. You're in one of the spare rooms in Hokage Tower. It wasn't safe to take you to the hospital without knowing the whole of the situation and what had happened to you," he claimed. Naruto's brow furrowed as he glanced at the silver-haired man sitting near his bed. Kakashi appeared to be paying little attention to Naruto and Iruka as they caught up, and Naruto's eyes widened when he realized what the man was reading. "Close your eyes for a moment," Iruka said when Naruto opened his mouth to shout at the Junin. Naruto blinked in confusion, but obeyed Iruka's request. The Academy sensei took a moment to glare in annoyance at the Junin, before he reached back behind his head and slipped off his forehead protector. Kakashi raised his eyebrow inquisitively, but Iruka poignantly ignored him. "Sandame is honoring Mizuki's promise," Iruka stated, reaching around Naruto's head and tying the forehead protector around Naruto's neck over the scars. Naruto blinked as a weight settled around his neck and opened his eyes as he tried to figure out what Iruka meant. When he noticed the lack of forehead protector on Iruka's head, his eyes widened and he reached up to finger the object around his neck. Once he had identified the cloth and metal materials of the object, he cautiously glanced down and barely believed his eyes when he realized what Iruka had given him. Naruto beamed at Iruka and launched himself at his teacher with what was supposed to be a whoop of joy, only to descend into a fit of coughing as he landed against Iruka. "Don't strain your throat," Iruka cautioned as he caught Naruto. He brought a hand up to the boy's mouth and wiped away a small amount of blood with a grimace. Kakashi caught sight of the blood and rose from his seat. "Apparently he hasn't fully healed. I'll go get the medic to check on him again," he stated, sliding out of the room. Naruto brought a hand up to his mouth in confusion as he coughed a bit more. He drew his hand away and Iruka sighed in relief when no blood was on it. "When Kakashi found you, your throat had been sliced 3 times. There was also evidence of an airborne poison that the medic believes was caustic enough to cause some internal damage," Iruka explained. Naruto listened patiently to what his teacher said, but blinked in confusion as he explained something about poison. "It damaged your lungs and throat," Iruka simplified when he caught Naruto's baffled look. Naruto opened his mouth cautiously and attempted to ask how bad the damage was. His lack of voice seemed to answer his question. Iruka watched cautiously as Naruto seemed to realize just what had happened to him. He was about to speak when Kakashi re-entered the room with a medic in tow. The medic glared slightly at Kakashi when he saw Naruto sitting quietly on the bed. "I thought you said he reopened something," the medic stated, walking over to Naruto. "He coughed up blood," Iruka explained. "Well, that's not out of the ordinary. His lungs and throat are rather raw. Any overexertion will disturb them and could cause bleeding," the medic explained, tilting Naruto's head up towards him. "Open your mouth," he said. Naruto complied without thinking. The medic held up a small flashlight and gazed into the boy's mouth. "It looks like it's already healing again, but try to avoid overstressing both areas for at least another week. Hopefully by then, the rawness will have decreased enough to avoid random coughing fits and bleeding," he explained. He gazed at Naruto in consideration for a moment before saying, "Attempt to say something. Don't shout, just attempt a simple word." Naruto opened his mouth and attempted to say hello, but nothing but air exited his mouth. Despite the damage to the throat itself, he should at least be able to whisper if that were the only damage. "I wasn't positive when I treated him earlier, but by now I don't see an explanation for complete vocal loss unless the nerve was damaged," the medic explained, standing back up and turning to Iruka and Kakashi. "His regenerative abilities don't seem to have corrected it, but I can't honestly speculate the reason behind that," he added. Naruto's eyes furrowed in confusion and he turned to Iruka, tugging on the man's sleeve to get his attention. Iruka placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder in reassurance, but turned back to the medic as he began to speak. "I'm sorry to say that as far as I'm aware, none of my staff has the capabilities of such a surgery to repair it," he stated, nodding to them and turning to go. He paused at the door and turned back to look at Naruto. "For the next week avoid irritating your throat. Don't attempt to speak and don't eat or drink anything too hot or too cold, he instructed. I'll check in later this week. Once the medic had disappeared, Iruka turned his attention back to Naruto. Kakashi reached under his chair and pulled out a small tablet and a piece of chalk. Use this to ask any questions, he said, handing the objects to Naruto. Naruto blinked as Iruka took them from Kakashi and handed them to him. Wait a minute, Iruka said as he did a double take at the tablet. Where did you get this? He asked, looking at Kakashi suspiciously. I snuck into the academy and took one from storage this morning after I heard the original diagnosis, Kakashi said nonchalantly, as he pulled his book back out. Naruto snickered quietly and Iruka sighed at the Junin. The book of course reminded Naruto of one of the first things he meant to say. Pervert, Naruto wrote before sliding the miniature chalkboard to Iruka and pointing to Kakashi. Iruka's eyes bulged slightly as he attempted not to laugh at Naruto's comment. I agree, he settled on saying, before quickly wiping the board clean and handing it back to Naruto. Kakashi briefly looked up from his book, but shrugged when he saw Naruto writing his next question. What next? He asked simply. Iruka looked at the question before launching into the plans that the Hokage had informed them of shortly before Naruto had woken up that afternoon. When Sandaime walked up to Naruto's room 2 hours later, he was smiling at the success of his talk with the elders. He had managed to gain Team 7's exemption from the secondary Genin exam without proposing it himself, and more importantly without bringing Naruto's condition into light. Kakashi, for once your reputation was a blessing, he muttered as he opened the door, hoping to find Naruto awake. He walked in to find Iruka chuckling at a rather put-out white-haired Junin. Naruto was scratching the back of his head sheepishly. What did I miss? Sandaime asked walking in. Naruto accidentally insulted Kakashi's hair, Iruka chuckled. Sandaime shook his head in amusement and sat down at the foot of the bed in the chair Iruka had abandoned. He studied Naruto's cheerful demeanor and pleased to note that the boy showed no signs of self-doubt or real anger. Despite the fact that he could be covering them up, at least he appeared to be handling the situation rather well. I'm not sure what you were told so far, but I'd like to explain at least some of what I feel should happen, he stated, catching Naruto's attention. For the next week as you begin your recovery, I want you to remain here. Depending on your condition next week, I may allow your release into Iruka's custody. This is in no way punishment. I'm merely concerned for your safety while we get you back on your feet. He assumed Naruto's nod meant the boy had already been told this. Next week all those who passed the Genin exam will be meeting on Monday for orientation and to be assigned to teams. Judging by the forehead protector on your neck, you were already told that because of your behavior once you realized the true situation last night you've passed as well. However, I don't want you at the orientation. I'd rather keep your promotion and status quiet for the time being until we can gauge exactly what Mizuki and his partner's goals were. Naruto opened his mouth to argue, but Iruka slapped a hand over it. Let him talk, he instructed. Naruto wilted slightly and crossed his arms huffily over his chest, turning to pout at the Hokage. Sandaime chuckled and continued. Genin are split into teams of 3 and assigned to a Junin sensei. You'll meet your teammates Monday afternoon. However, your sensei is sitting right here, he said, pointing to Kakashi. I am pleased to see that you two have gotten off on the right foot. Kakashi turned to smirk rather evilly at Naruto, and the blonde cowered slightly when he realized how angry the Junin probably was at all the insults. Sandaime allowed himself to chuckle briefly at their interaction before continuing. Over the next week I would like you to begin studying sign language with Iruka. Your teammates will learn some as well next week, but I would like you to be able to converse with Kakashi and Iruka. I'll leave it up to them, he said, gaining a nod from Naruto. Excellent, Sandaime said, standing back up. I'll check in on you again tomorrow in case you come up with any questions. Until then sleep well and don't let Kakashi annoy you too much. When the Hokage had left, Naruto turned to Iruka pouting. I want ramen, he wrote. Iruka glanced at Naruto's request and smiled politely at him. The medic said no ramen, he stated. Naruto looked up at him fearfully and shook his head. He said nothing too hot. I suppose I could get you some ramen, but you would have to let it sit in front of you for at least half an hour as it cooled. Then you would have to be very careful to eat it slowly, and I couldn't possibly let you have more than one bowl because that just wouldn't be healthy as you recover, Iruka explained. It was Kakashi's turn to chuckle as Naruto gaped helplessly at Iruka. "Why don't I go find something healthy for you to eat?" the Junin offered, standing up still smirking at Naruto. Haruno Sakura was in heaven. She had arrived an hour early the day of Genin orientation with the intent of getting a seat next to one Uchiha Sasuke. She had succeeded. He had even made it easy for her by taking the seat farthest from the center aisle so that there was only one seat available that was next to him. As they say, the early bird gets the worm, and she had gotten it in the form of that one open seat. Now she was one step closer to becoming Uchiha Sakura. To make matters even better, she had heard that her bane, Uzumaki Naruto, had failed the Genin exams for the third time in a row, so there was no chance she would have to worry about being on a team with him. Better yet, no one had even seen or heard from him in the week since the exam. Yes, she was definitely in heaven, she thought as she turned to glance prettily at Sasuke. Iruka shook his head in amusement at the group of new Genin in front of him. It never ceased to amuse him how excited they got, even though the majority of them would end up either back at the academy, dropping out, or under special care instead of becoming active Genin. He was a little disappointed that no one had supposedly noticed Naruto's absence, but he knew Naruto hadn't really been close friends with any of his classmates unless he was working with them to skip class. He only hoped that the Hokage knew what he was doing by placing Naruto with Kakashi, Sakura, and Sasuke. They would definitely be an odd group. He glanced down at the team listings and smirked. They would all be odd groups. Shikamaru's utterance of, "How troublesome," was his cue to start, so he shuffled his papers a final time and stood up to face the students he had taught for the past 4 years. He cleared his throat to get his students' attention and smiled at their excited faces. "Congratulations, from this day forward you are no longer merely students of ninjutsu. As of today you are all Genin. Today you join the proud ranks of Shinobi of Konoha. However, it would do each and every one of you good to remember that among these ranks you are at the bottom. You all have a great deal to learn, and for some of you, you may learn that being a shinobi is not what you imagined. Some of you may learn that being a shinobi is not meant for you. Today I will divide you into 3 mad teams that were decided upon by the Hokage. You and your teammates will work together under the guidance of a Junin. This Junin will aid you as you become accustomed to the many duties that shinobi must accomplish." Iruka finished his opening speech and looked up at his students smiling. Many only looked more excited, but he was glad to see that at least a few of them looked uncomfortable. And so he got started. The first 5 teams complied happily with their new assignments, but if he was to be completely honest with himself, none of them would pass the second exam. Team 8. Hyuga Hinata, Aburame Shino, and Inazuka Kiba. Team 9. Akame Amy, Lufan, and Hajiri Fuki. And finally Team 10. Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, and Akamichi Choji. All of you have an hour for lunch. After that, please return here to meet with your sensei. I wish all of you luck, he said, still smiling at them. Sakura looked at him in confusion for a moment before glancing around the classroom and back at Iruka. She began to raise her hand when he glanced over at her. "I'll speak with you just a moment," Iruka said before Sakura could say anything. He turned away from his curious students and began packing away his papers so that he could accompany Sasuke and Sakura to meet with Kakashi. When he finished and turned back around, he was amused to see his entire class still in their seats. "I said you could all go to lunch," he repeated in amusement. "Iruka-sensei, if Sasuke-kun doesn't have a team, he can be on mine. I'm sure Choji or Shikamaru wouldn't mind leaving," Ino told him sweetly. Iruka chuckled at her hopefulness, but only shook his head at her. "All of you are dismissed for lunch. I'm taking Sakura and Sasuke to meet their new sensei and teammate," Iruka informed them, heading for the door and beckoning for the 2 students to follow. "I'm on Sasuke-kun's team," Sakura shouted in excitement, as she stuck her tongue out at Ino and followed Iruka out the door. "I'd feel sorry for him if he wasn't such a jackass," Shikamaru muttered to Choji and Kiba, gaining a few chuckles. "So who do you think their new teammate is?" Kiba asked, catching the classroom's attention. "It could be Naruto," Choji suggested, "maybe he didn't fail after all." "Nay, it's probably some Genin whose team has already been promoted or killed," Shikamaru reasoned. "Whoever it is, I don't care enough to look into it." Iruka led Sasuke and Sakura out of the academy and towards the administration building. He ignored their questioning glances the whole way there. If he was to be honest with them, he would admit that he wasn't fully aware of what Kakashi was planning either. He wasn't sure he liked the idea of bringing them to Naruto's room with no explanation, but Kakashi seemed to believe it was important for Naruto to be there when they were told. As they walked past the Hokage's office, Sandaime surprised them by calling out to Iruka and asking them to wait for him. "Ah, thank you. I was just getting ready to head over and check on his progress," Sandaime informed them as he exited his office and joined them in the hall. "Of course," Iruka said, turning back to the hallway and heading towards Naruto's room. "When I left this morning, he had solved the name problem by deciding to just use nicknames for everyone," Iruka explained. "Also, he's improved a lot faster than we expected. His lexicon isn't large, but what he knows well and is able to recall quickly. We didn't actually expect him to be able to hold a conversation this early, but he was actually getting close this morning. Of course, he would probably be learning quite a bit quicker if he didn't constantly stop to read that comic you gave him," Iruka added, turning to scowl slightly at Sandaime. "Ah, I was hoping he'd enjoy that. I got one for my grandson as well to reward him for his hard work in school," Sandaime answered, smiling at Iruka's frustration. Iruka paused in front of the door to Naruto's room and knocked twice, waiting for Kakashi to answer. A moment later, the door was yanked open by Kakashi and his glare immediately settled on Iruka. "Pervert?" he asked, causing Sasuke and Sakura to look over at Iruka in shock. "Excuse me?" Iruka asked. "You taught him how to sign, pervert," Kakashi stated. "I did not. His language was horrible before. I'm certainly not teaching him anything like that," Iruka countered angrily, shoving his way into the room. He stopped short when he saw Naruto curled up on the bed shaking with laughter. "I must apologize, Kakashi," Sandaime said from the door as he chuckled at the sight. "I taught him the sign last night and it wasn't until just now that I realized why he wanted to learn it," he apologized, chuckling at the Junin. "Now if you don't mind, your students are all here and I believe they have quite a bit to hear," he said, ushering Sasuke and Sakura in and pointing to the chairs that had been left near Naruto's bedside. Sandaime followed them in and sat next to Naruto on the opposite side of the bed. "Naruto's our teammate? I thought he didn't graduate," Sakura said in confusion. "Naruto took an alternate exam after it was learned that one of the academy teachers was biased against him," Sandaime explained. "Kakashi, I'll allow you to explain the rest of the situation to them." "I'll let Iruka do it," Kakashi informed them, sitting down next to Sandaime and pulling out his book. Iruka looked at him in exasperation, but when the Sandaime chuckled and nodded to him, he sighed and turned back to Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto. "Under normal circumstances, none of you would actually be Genin yet. Normally, after passing the academy tests and being placed on teams, you would face a second test that is meant to gauge your ability to work as active shinobi on a team. For several reasons, including Naruto's injuries, the council decided that your team would not take this test. They didn't do this because they believed that you would not be able to pass the test on your own. In fact, it was done for the opposite reason. However, they had to judge on the cautious side and Kakashi's reputation worried them. Because you won't be taking this test, all of you are now officially Genin, and once Naruto is released you'll be able to begin active duty including missions. However, because you didn't go through the second test, this team will be run slightly differently from the other Genin teams. The majority of your team's emphasis will be focused on training," he explained. He wasn't sure he liked the glint that had appeared in Naruto and Sasuke's eyes. "You will accomplish missions less frequently than other teams. Most likely you will only achieve enough to take the Chunin exams at the time Kakashi chooses, probably in about a year," he continued. He was certain he didn't like the glint that appeared in Kakashi's eyes. "Starting tomorrow, Kakashi will be testing each of you individually. He will grade you in all aspects of ninja ability, even those that you may not be aware of. I have agreed to give all three of you some individual supplementary training so that Kakashi can focus on your teamwork and overall training," he finished, smiling at them. Sandaime smiled at the three Genin as they took in everything Iruka had told them. Most of it was new even to Naruto. Kakashi looked up with start when he realized Iruka had finished speaking. "Actually, I already finished testing Naruto. His results are over there," he said, pointing to a folder on the nightstand next to Naruto's bed. Sandaime nodded to him and then turned back to the three. "I should warn all three of you that while this seems like a remarkable opportunity, it will not be easy. Council decisions such as this one are not common knowledge, however, there is nothing to stop your friends from finding out. You may be criticized by others who believe you are being favored over them or who believe you are being pampered. There may come a time when you have to show others that you deserve this. And there will come a time when you have to show the council and myself that we were right in believing that you were worthy, he told them gravely. And with that, Iruka and I are going to step out for a bit, he stated, standing up and taking Naruto's folder with him. I'll be back to check on Naruto's progress later tonight, he added as he walked out the door with Iruka right behind him. The three genin appeared shocked at Sandame's previous words, so Kakashi waited a few moments after the Hokage left before speaking. Now that you understand the situation a bit better, why don't you tell me a bit about yourselves? Things like your favorite things, what you hate the most, dreams, ambitions, hobbies, favorite volume of Icha Paradise, most embarrassing story about Iruka-sensei, etc. He finished, eye curving up in amusement. You first, he decided after a moment, pointing to Sakura. My favorite thing is, well, it's not a thing, it's a person. A boy. And that boy is, she paused for a moment and glanced over at Sasuke, blushing. Let's move on to my dream. She paused again and let out a small squeal and blushed a deeper red as she glanced at Sasuke again. My hobbies are. She let off a soft sigh as she turned to and smiled dreamily at Sasuke before coming back to her senses and turning back to the others. I hate stupid people who goof off all the time, she said, glancing at Naruto out of the corner of her eye. I don't know what Icha Paradise is, and I don't know any embarrassing stories about Iruka-sensei, and even if I did I probably wouldn't share them with you because apparently you're a pervert, she finished resolutely with a light glare in Kakashi's direction. Kakashi outwardly giggled at her insult and made mental notes of her speech as he turned to Sasuke, who had stared resolutely at the wall during Sakura's entire speech. Now you, Casanova, he quipped, causing Sakura to blush to the roots of her hair and Sasuke to glare at him. There are plenty of things I hate, but I don't see how it matters, considering there is almost nothing I like. It seems pointless to talk about dreams, that's just a word, but I do have an ambition. To restore my clan and to kill a certain man, Sasuke finished. Much to Kakashi's annoyance, he hadn't even bothered to respond to his last two questions. All right, Kakashi said, turning to Naruto and getting a grin in response. Naruto's been practicing all day for this, so let's try it, he said, causing the other two to look at Naruto in confusion. So now you're so stupid that you have to practice to answer questions that don't have a right or wrong answer, Sasuke commented, smirking at the blonde. Kakashi was impressed with Naruto's quick response and use of sign language, but he was fairly certain that it wasn't anything Iruka or even Sandame had taught him. Now kiddies, let's all get along, he said, grinning at them. Go ahead Naruto, he said when Sasuke crossed his arms and stopped smirking. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment and scrunched his face up in concentration before nodding to himself and turning to look at his teammates. I like ramen. I like it when sensei buys me ramen at restaurants. I hate waiting 3 minutes for instant ramen and when sensei doesn't let me have ramen. I want to become Hokage and gain acknowledgement from the villagers, Naruto finished, looking over to grin at Kakashi. Kakashi grinned back at Naruto, before turning to the two stooped genin sitting next to him. Since I'm sure neither of you understand sign language, allow me to interpret for you. He said he likes ramen, especially when Iruka buys it for him from Ichiraku's. He hates waiting 3 minutes for instant ramen to cook and when Iruka doesn't let him have ramen, which I would like to remind him is in fact the order of his doctor. His dream is to become Hokage and gain acknowledgement from the villagers, which will be discussed at a later date, he explained, trailing off to whisper lightly at the end. Why did he use sign language? Sakura asked, her eyes attempting not to tear up at the possibilities. Naruto was injured in an attack a week ago. His voice is out of commission until Sandame can contact a competent medic, Kakashi explained. This means, of course, that part of your training will be learning sign language. Iruka will be including that in your supplementary training, beginning tomorrow. And no, you cannot slack off simply because you feel it is an inconvenience, he added the last part looking over at Sasuke, who scowled deeper. Sakura was looking intently at Naruto as he grinned over at Kakashi. After a moment she turned to look at Kakashi, but he began speaking again before she could say anything. Well, we're finished for the day. Naruto is stuck here for the next 2 days, which is why I'm using tomorrow and the day after that for your testing, he said, pointing to Sakura and Sasuke. Tomorrow morning, I want the two of you to report to Sandame's office. He'll tell you where to go after that. I'll start with Sasuke's test tomorrow. Sakura, you'll be working with Naruto and Iruka on sign language, he told them. I'll show the two of you out, he added, standing up. Naruto, I'll send Iruka back in when I pass him. Naruto grinned and signed, ramen. No, I will not tell him to get you ramen, Kakashi retorted as he closed the door. The next morning Sakura arrived at the administration building bright and early. She ran into Sasuke outside of the Hokage's office, where he was sitting impatiently against the wall. His aides said he would see us at 8, Sasuke told her. She checked her watch and saw that they still had 15 minutes to wait. It would have been nice of Kakashi-sensei to tell us that, she muttered angrily. Luckily they didn't have to wait that long, as Sandame's chuckle told them he was already prepared to see them. Now, it's nothing that bad, he promised them as he ushered them into his office. I wanted to talk to you this morning because there are several things I need to explain to the two of you. As I'm sure Kakashi told you yesterday, Naruto was injured about a week ago, which resulted in his loss of voice. For the time being, I'm going to ask that you not tell anyone that Naruto is on your team. This will not last for very long, but we are trying to keep Naruto's injuries from becoming general knowledge. As I'm sure you both know, a shinobi should keep their weaknesses well hidden, and we would like to help him do so. For now, if people simply don't know where he is less likely to be forced into compromising himself, he told them. So, can we not talk about our team? Sakura asked in confusion. Not at all, I'm simply asking that you avoid giving his name and talking about him specifically. It will probably be easier to do if you talk about your team in general instead of each member specifically. Do you understand? He asked. Sakura nodded reluctantly, trying to figure out how she would be able to do so. Sandame smiled at their nods and then turned to lead them back to the door. I'll take you to Kakashi now, he added, leading them out into the hallway. They passed two of the Hokage's aides on the way and Sasuke glared at them as they chuckled. When they reached Naruto's room, Sandame knocked twice and they waited. After several moments, Naruto answered the door and let them in. They aren't here, he explained to Sandame. Well then, while we're waiting for them, why don't you show me what you learned last night? Sandame suggested, taking a chair next to Naruto. Naruto thought for a moment and then began signing a list of words. While Sakura and Sasuke watched, Sandame studied Naruto's movements, occasionally pointing out small mistakes. Sandame's eyes widened when Naruto signed his 7th word and reached out his hands to stop Naruto from going on. Who on earth taught you that one? He asked, gaining a sheepish grin from Naruto before he signed, pervert. Why? Sandame asked in exasperation. Naruto snickered and signed, names. Whose? Naruto grinned and jabbed his finger in Sasuke's direction. I should have seen this coming, Sandame said, sighing. Is there any way you can be convinced to change it? Naruto nodded his head resolutely. What is he calling me? Sasuke asked cautiously. Naruto repeated the sign and Sasuke and Sakura turned to Sandame for explanation. He's signing, bastard, Sandame finally explained. How dare you call Sasuke-kun that? Sakura shouted in outrage, standing up and preparing to berate Naruto. What did he call Sasuke? Iruka asked, cutting off Sakura's rant. He entered the room and placed the bag he was carrying on the table next to Naruto's bed. Well, what did you call him? He asked a suddenly sheepish Naruto. Naruto hesitantly repeated the signing, bastard. Iruka smacked his forehead with the palm of his hand and turned to look down at Naruto. You're giving me a headache, he told the boy. I realize you find this amusing, but if you refuse to be nice, can't you at least call him something neutral? I'm sure he would rather be called boy or blue than your choice. I'd rather he just use my name, Sasuke growled out. Well, that would be rather cumbersome, Iruka explained. Naruto is in fact not learning sign language to completely replace speaking. There is still a possibility that he will be healed. Because of this, he's learning it in stages of practicality, and fingerspelling, which is how most names are done in sign language, is quite impractical, Sandame explained. What do you mean? Sakura asked. Sadly, in order to sign Sasuke, it would take more time than it does to sign bastard, Iruka said. Mainly due to the fact that time is often of the essence, Naruto is learning to abbreviate where he can. so context will be important when interpreting what he signs, Sandaime added. Well, don't call Sasuke, bastard, Sakura said, turning back to berate Naruto. Well, that's not fair. No one protested when he decided to call me pervert, Kakashi whined falsely from the door. Naruto rolled his eyes at his whining, and Sakura noted that it was synchronized with Iruka's eye roll. You are one, Iruka finally stated. Try to come up with something else today, alright? He told Naruto. Naruto nodded grudgingly as Iruka turned back to the bag he had brought and pulled out a book. Which one are you taking today? He asked Kakashi. I'll work with Sasuke today and do Sakura's tomorrow. Keep her here until I return though so I can talk to all three of them again, Kakashi said, stepping up behind Sasuke and placing a hand on his shoulder. Iruka nodded and handed the book to Sakura as Kakashi and Sasuke left. I'll come by and check on you all later, Sandaime said with a wave as he followed Kakashi and Sasuke out the door, shutting it behind him. Did you eat breakfast? Iruka asked Sakura as he began pulling food out of the bag. No, I was in a hurry, she explained, deciding not to mention the fact that she was in fact on diet so she had skipped breakfast altogether. You can eat with us then while you skim over that, he said, fixing her some food. That's a short overview. Look over it first and then I'll start working with you. Eat first of course, he said. As the three ate, Sakura looked over at Naruto curiously. How much sign language do you know? She asked him. Naruto thought for a minute before shrugging and turning to Iruka. He's learned quite a bit actually. We've been teaching him for the past week or so. Normally this isn't something you would cram and learn so quickly, but the fact that he has to use it helps him. He understands the basics of sign order and such, so right now we're beefing up his vocabulary. At final count last night he knew almost 200 signs, Iruka explained. He wouldn't be able to hold a conversation with just anybody on the street because we've been selective with the order we've been teaching him words in. We had to practice all morning when I realized Kakashi was going to ask you to introduce yourselves, because those were signs that we hadn't taught him yet, he added. Will I be learning in the same order as him? Sakura asked, gaining a nod from Iruka. Right now the first things we have to teach you and Sasuke is how to understand Naruto. Neither of you have to use sign language to speak back to him, but if you can't understand him your teamwork will suffer because one of you will essentially be unable to be anything more than a bystander. We want to build Naruto's lexicon up to at least 500 signs before you start missions. After that Kakashi will probably teach the three of you lip reading, which you can use to extend conversations with Naruto past what he knows how to sign, Iruka told her. After breakfast, Sakura turned to the book Iruka had given her and spent the rest of the morning reading it and asking Iruka questions. Iruka and Naruto spent the morning going over new signs and occasionally holding conversations to make sure that Naruto was putting everything together correctly. Sandaime brought them lunch at about noon. Naruto eagerly showed him everything he had learned that morning and Sandaime spent some time testing him and conversing with him using signs. While watching them, Sakura realized for the first time that Sandaime, Iruka, and Kakashi all seemed to know sign language perfectly. She sat up a bit and turned to Iruka where he was watching Naruto describe a scene in the comic Sandaime had given him. Iruka-sensei, where did you learn sign language? She asked, catching Iruka slightly off guard and ending Naruto and Sandaime's conversation as they turned to look at her. She was slightly abashed at the sudden onslaught of attention and spoke to retract her question. I'm sorry if it's too personal. It's not that, Iruka responded, smiling at her. I just never thought to explain it. My mother and grandmother were both deaf. Well, technically my grandmother was only partially, but she still primarily used sign language unless she was forced to do otherwise. I learned it from them, he explained. Hokage-sama, do you mind if I ask how you learned it? She said. I learned it shortly after I became Hokage. It was simply part of the job at the time, he explained. Naruto tugged at Iruka's sleeve and signed, pervert? You'll have to ask him, Iruka told him. Sandaime was called away soon after when his aides came to warn him that his grandson was looking for him. After lunch they went back to work, until Kakashi and Sasuke returned near dusk. That was a long day, Iruka remarked as the two returned. Sasuke sank into one of the chairs and glared up at Kakashi who smiled back at Iruka. Doesn't matter, I've learned everything I needed to, Kakashi retorted. Iruka rolled his eyes and turned to watch Naruto as he attempted to gain Kakashi's attention. Kakashi, who had chosen to blatantly ignore Naruto just for the heck of it, learned never to do so again when Naruto lashed out and kicked him far closer to the groin than Kakashi was able to continue ignoring. He looked down at Naruto, but refrained from yelling at him when Naruto signed, "I have a question." "What?" he asked. Naruto thought for a moment and attempted to ask it twice before giving up and turning to Sakura. "Oh, we wanted to know how you learned sign language," Sakura said for him. Kakashi looked at them for a moment before his eye turned up in amusement and leaned in conspiratorially. "That is a secret," he told them happily before turning around and heading to the door. "I trust the two of you can find this room by now. Meet me here tomorrow morning. Sakura, make sure you eat breakfast," he ordered as he left. "A secret?" Sakura asked no one in particular. "Ignore him for now. He'll tell you eventually," Iruka assured her. He turned to Sasuke and asked, "Have you eaten dinner yet?" Sasuke only shook his head no. "Did he stop long enough to let you eat lunch?" he asked, gaining another negative from Sasuke. "Do you want to rest here for a bit while I go get dinner for all of us?" he asked. Sasuke hesitated momentarily, but Iruka was pleased by the tired nod he got from him. "What about you, Sakura?" he asked, turning to her. "I guess I can. My dad's not supposed to be back from his mission yet," she answered. "I'll be back in a bit then," he said, leaving the three teens in silence. Sakura arrived at the administration building the next morning with a nervous flutter in her stomach. Maybe she should have ignored her sensei's instructions and skipped breakfast. Sasuke had looked exhausted when he returned from testing the night before. He had been the head of their class in everything. Her test scores had been perfect, but she wasn't stupid. Her test scores weren't likely to help her much with this testing. There was also the problem of Kakashi-sensei. She knew nothing about him and doubted that Naruto or Sasuke-kun knew much more. She didn't know what he expected her to be able to do. Fortunately, she knew that she was far below other kunoichi of her rank when it came to physical skills. Sakura didn't even want to think about how far below Naruto and Sasuke-kun she was. She absent-mindedly waved to the Hokage's aides as she turned down the small hallway that led to Naruto's room. She reached up to knock when Iruka opened the door and looked down at her in surprise, mirroring her own. "Ah, sorry Sakura, go on in," he said, stepping out of the way to allow her in. "I'll be back in a few minutes, please behave," he said, stepping out. Sakura looked around the room in confusion before she spotted Naruto and Sasuke glaring at each other. "Naruto, what did you do to Sasuke-kun?" she asked. Naruto gaped her for a moment before signing something that she didn't understand. "I don't know what that means," she admitted to him. Naruto's face fell slightly and he turned away to scowl at the window. She shrugged at his behavior and took a seat next to Sasuke to wait for Kakashi to arrive. When Iruka returned 15 minutes later, Kakashi had yet to arrive and all three genin were beginning to fidget. "He's not here yet?" he asked with a sigh. Sakura was about to answer when Kakashi appeared in the doorway behind Iruka. "Who's not here?" he asked, causing Iruka to swirl around to face him. "Never mind." Iruka growled at Kakashi's infuriating nonchalance. "Well then, Sakura, why don't you come with me? I'll leave Naruto and Sasuke to you." Kakashi responded happily, beckoning for Sakura to follow him out of the room. She nervously stood up and waved to the others as she walked out and silently followed Kakashi out of the administration building and through the streets. When they reached one of the smaller training fields, Kakashi stopped and turned around to look at her. "First things first, do 100 sit-ups and 100 push-ups," he ordered, pulling out his book. Sakura nodded and complied quickly. These exercises had typical in the academy, so she wasn't overly worried about her performance on them. She finished several minutes later and was pleased to note that she hadn't felt too much strain. "Alright then, start laps around this area. I'll tell you when to stop," he said. Once again she nodded and complied. After about 20 laps, which she judged to be about 4 kilometers, she was a bit winded, but she continued on as Kakashi glanced lazily between her figure and his book. 10 more laps and her pace had slowed significantly. Every time she passed Kakashi and he didn't stop her, she glared at him but continued on. Finally, as she was struggling to finish her 50th lap, Kakashi called out to her and beckoned her over. "Good work," he told her, as she stood in front of him. "You're a little weaker than I would have expected, but I was told by Iruka that kunoichi around your age have been shunting physical training in the academy, so we'll just have to work you a little harder. Take a short break, then we'll move on," he told her. Sakura happily slumped down on the ground and leaned over to catch her breath. She swayed slightly as the wind picked up and a dizzy spell passed over her, but she shook her head and ignored it. After several minutes of silence, she looked up to ask her sensei a question only to find him not standing in front of her. "Kakashi-sensei," she said, as she stood up and looked around the suddenly barren training area. "Where did you go?" "Sakura," she heard someone say off to her right, "over here." "Kakashi-sensei, what?" she began to ask before being cut off. Sakura, the voice said weakly. It wasn't Kakashi's voice, but she knew it was one she recognized from somewhere. "Sakura," it repeated, slightly more clearly than the previous times. Her eyes widened in recognition and she sped up as she walked towards the source of the voice. "Sasuke-kun, what are you doing out here? Did you come to see how my test was going?" she asked sweetly as she neared her dear Sasuke-kun. "Sakura, help me," she heard Sasuke plead as she stopped dead in her tracks. "Help," Sasuke repeated faintly, jump-starting Sakura's actions as she sprinted the last few meters to his location. She froze on the spot when she saw leaning haphazardly against the trunk of a tree as if it was the only thing holding him up, which it probably was, considering the massive amounts of kunai and shuriken piercing him from the waist up. She swayed unsteadily on her feet as she watched him reach toward her and struggle to stand. "What?" she whimpered in confusion as she took a step towards him. "Help," he said one final time before his eyes slid shut and his body slid to the ground. "Sasuke-kun?" she whimpered again, kneeling down next to him and reaching forward. She reached towards his neck and checked for a pulse to find it already gone. "Sasuke-kun?" she repeated, nudging him slightly as she began to pull the weapons out of him, tossing him behind her. "Sasuke-kun? Sasuke, please wake up, Sasuke," she said. His voice grew steadier and louder with each word. When the boy in front of her failed to respond, she began shaking and her hands fell away from the remaining weapons as she collapsed over him sobbing. She wasn't sure how long she had been crying when she suddenly felt a hand in her hair. She relaxed slightly at the comforting touch, until the hand tightened its grasp and yanked her backwards away from Sasuke. Sakura screamed and attempted to steady herself so that she could get a glimpse back at her attacker, but a kunai was placed at Sakura's throat, prohibiting her from moving her head. "Don't move or we'll kill the other boy too," a gruff voice said. She heard the sound of something being dragged along the ground, and strained her eyes to the right only to see Naruto's unconscious form lying on the ground. She whimpered and tried to stop her mind from going into overdrive so that she could find a way out of the situation. None of it made sense. Sasuke and Naruto were supposed to be with Iruka-sensei. Neither of them should have come down for any reason. If the Hokage had needed Kakashi-sensei, then he would have sent one of his aides. Kakashi-sensei wouldn't have left her without telling her. She knew the man was weird, but he couldn't be that weird or that rude. She calmed almost immediately as she came to a final conclusion. This is still part of the test. "Shut up, girl," the person behind her said, yanking roughly on her hair. She quieted but kept up her internal dialogue as she tried to figure out what this had to do with the test and how to pass it. Had Kakashi-sensei called Naruto and Sasuke down here and faked their current states to prove something to her? Were they some type of special clones? Or others, using henge? What could possibly be doing Olive? Her thoughts quieted as she came to her second conclusion: Genjutsu. She slowly brought her hands together in the tiger sign and whispered, "Kai." The wind picked up slightly and whirlwind of leaves surrounded her. As the leaves faded away, the sound of clapping reached her ears. Sakura turned her head to look for the source, but she felt something tug at her hair. She fought not to begin panicking again, and slowly reached back to see what her hair was caught in. She relaxed slightly when she felt bark and not skin. She fiddled around for a bit as she tried to loosen her hair, but she had no luck. "Ah, sorry about that," Kakashi said, landing in front of her. "Give me a moment and I'll have you loose." She felt a couple of tugs on her hair as he worked to get it loose, but 5 minutes later he had no luck either. I guess you struggled a bit more than it seemed like. Either that or I let the branch get too tight, but that's not likely," Kakashi muttered, earning himself a glare from Sakura. "Well, there's really nothing else to do," he said, pulling out a kunai. Sakura panicked slightly when she saw him reach behind her with a kunai. "Wait, what are you?" Her sentence dropped off when felt a final tug on her hair and then something soft landed on her arm. She glanced down cautiously and saw locks of pink hair scattered about on the ground. You cut my hair. I was growing that out for Sasuke-kun and you. Her rant was cut short when Kakashi squatted down in front of her and placed a hand over her mouth. You think about Sasuke too much. He's your main weakness at the moment and it's one that is very easy to exploit. I'm not saying that it's wrong to care, but you center everything you do on Sasuke. You don't train enough and you diet too much because you want a specific body type. You dress, act, and look not only impractically, but contrary to the way you were taught to act as a kunoichi. Sasuke is now your teammate. I won't tolerate you favoring one teammate over the other. I also won't tolerate you allowing yourself to be distracted by him. Think about that instead of your hair. It would have gotten you killed one day anyways, Kakashi stated bluntly, shocking Sakura. She sat quietly even after he had removed his hand and stood up. Kakashi finally accepted her silence as understanding and reached down to help her stand up. She rose shakily and he led back towards the training field. Good job with the genjutsu. Iruka mentioned you might find your knack in that area and I'd say it's worth a shot. You're Haruno Sanzo's daughter, right? He asked. Yeah, Sakura replied, turning to him with curious gaze. Kakashi eyed her for a moment before continuing. I think the Hokage said he would be back from his mission tomorrow. When you see him tomorrow night, ask him to teach you Iko Akechi, Kakashi told her. I've never heard of that, Sakura informed. Don't worry, he'll know what it is, Kakashi promised as they left the training grounds and headed for the administration building. When they reached the administration building, Sakura caught a number of eyes with her uneven haircut, which she ignored in favor of glaring at Kakashi's back as he hummed and continued to read his book. He walked straight into Naruto's room without looking, but Sakura hesitated at the door. After taking a deep breath she stepped up behind Kakashi and noticed that Iruka was occupied explaining something to Sasuke. Naruto was the first to notice their entrance and when he noticed the state of Sakura's hair his jaw dropped. He reached over and nudged Iruka's shoulder several times until Iruka finally looked up. He was about to reprimand Naruto when he also caught sight of Sakura's hair. Kakashi, what did you do? He bit out, glaring at the older man. I accidentally got her hair tangled in tree branch so I had to cut it off, he explained cheerily, taking a seat. Wouldn't it have been easier to cut off the branch and work from there? Iruka asked. Sakura's eyes widened when she realized he was right and she turned to look at Kakashi with teary eyes. I never thought of that, Kakashi muttered, before shrugging. Sakura fought the urge not whimper and instead focused her energy on glaring at Kakashi as hard as possible. Iruka stood up and walked over to her. Come on, I'll take you to get it at least cut properly. Kakashi, don't leave this room, he warned as he escorted Sakura out of the room. As they were walking past the Hokage's office, Sandaime stepped out and lightly closed the door, muffling the childish shouting from inside. He turned and began to walk away lightly, and Sakura had to fight the urge to giggle when she realized he was tiptoeing. Hokage-sama? Iruka called out lightly. Sandaime turned around in surprise and brought a finger to his mouth before beckoning for them to catch up. Konohamaru is throwing another fit, he explained as they continued down the hallway. Konohamaru? Sakura said. My grandson, he enjoys challenging me to fights believing he'll become Hokage if he beats, Sandaime explained before stopping in his tracks and doing a double take of Sakura's hair. What did Kakashi do? He asked after a moment. Sakura giggled at his exasperated tone. He cut it off when it got stuck in a tree branch. I'm taking her to get it fixed and to get dinner for all of us, Iruka explained. If you'd like we can stop by the Junin lounge. If Anko's in she could fix it up rather quickly, that way you wouldn't have to walk through the village, Sandaime offered. Really? Sakura asked hopefully. The walk back from the training field had been bad enough. If she went out in the village again there was chance that someone who knew her might see her. Of course, Sandaime promised, patting her on the head. Would it be a problem if I leave her with you then? That way I could go get food while she's getting her hair fixed and get back a bit earlier, Iruka suggested. Not at all, Sandaime replied. Do you have any preferences for dinner? If I can get someone to say something other than ramen it'll give me another reason to not give it to Naruto, Iruka said. Anything's fine really, Sakura said. When Iruka looked slightly crestfallen she added, but sushi's always good. Sushi it is then, Iruka said happily. I wonder if Naruto's ever tried it before. Anyways, I'll see you when I get back. Just head up to Naruto's room when you're finished. Sakura blinked as Iruka walked away, but Sandame's hand on her shoulder. He smiled at her and led her down the hallway. After going down 2 floors, the Sandame stopped outside of a pair of double doors and peeked through the window. "Excellent, she's still here and the room isn't too full," he said, turning to Sakura with a smile. He opened the door and stepped in, greeting everyone in the room. Sakura followed slowly, taking in her surroundings as she followed Sandame in the direction of a young woman happily munching on dango. She looked up in surprise when she saw Sandame approaching and quickly finished chewing before greeting him. "Good evening, Hokage-sama." "To you as well," he returned, before reaching back and pulling Sakura forward slightly. "I was wondering if you could do us a little favor. Sakura's hair was sheared off in an accident during training and I was wondering if you had the time to fix it up a bit," Sandame explained. "Sheared off?" Anko asked, standing up and reaching out to finger the edges. She pulled a stray twig off and Sakura eyed it in disgust, causing Anko to smirk at her. "Well, have a seat and I'll fix it up a bit." Sakura nodded and complied quickly. "So how much hair did you lose?" Anko asked, stepping behind Sakura and pulling out a kunai. "About 8 inches, Sakura answered ruefully. Anko whistled in response, catching the attention of the 2 other Junin in the room who walked over curiously. "You giving out free haircuts now?" one of them asked through the toothpick in his mouth. "Will you give you one to Guy and that student of his if we drag them in here? We'll even tie them up and knock them out if that'll make it easier for you," a second Junin, with scar on his left cheek, suggested. "Not even my expertise would be able to fix what they've done to themselves," Anko muttered, causing all 3 adults to chuckle. Now, Sandame said as his chuckles died down, "individuality is encouraged among my shinobi and that occasionally leads to oddity. I recall the time you yellow polka dot bikini top and a purple miniskirt for a month." "Some of my best days," Anko replied wistfully. "I'd agree," the scarred man added just as wistfully. "Now that Naruto kid, he's got good taste too. Where's he been lately anyways?" "The village is too quiet without his pranks," Anko stated, dropping the lock of hair she had been trimming and turning to look at Sandame. "Naruto's recovering from his run-in with Mizuki. He'll be up and about in a few weeks' time, I believe," Sandame answered. "That long?" Anko sighed, turning back to Sakura's hair. None of them had noticed her slight stiffening when Naruto had been brought up. At least the question had been directed at Sandame and not at her. "So what exactly happened here anyways?" the scarred man asked, pulling up a chair and sitting down in front of Sakura. "Lost 8 inches during training," Anko answered for her. "How?" "I mean, I know I tried to cut off my sister's hair a couple of times when I was younger, but I never actually succeeded," he retorted. "Raida, I pity your sister. How did it happen?" Anko asked, stepping around to face Sakura. For the first time Sakura noticed that the woman had been using a kunai and turned to her in surprise. "You've been cutting my hair with a kunai this whole time?" "Trust me sweetheart, there isn't anything I can't do with a kunai," she replied with a wink. "Obviously whoever did this used a kunai as well, but they weren't nearly as talented as me. My sensei cut it off when it got caught in a tree branch," Sakura answered sheepishly. "How the hell did you get your hair caught in a tree branch?" Anko answered, stopping to stare at her. "Well, it wasn't my fault. My sensei caught me in a genjutsu," Sakura answered. "What genjutsu was he using?" Sandame asked curiously. "I don't know the name of it. It took me a while to get out of it, and when I did I realized that what I had thought was a hand holding my hair was actually a branch," she answered. "You got out of it yourself?" Raida asked. "Did you cancel it?" "Yeah, once I realized it was a genjutsu I just used the dispel technique," Sakura said. "Impressive. You a genin?" the one with the toothpick asked. "Of course she is. You're in the latest batch of them, aren't you?" Anko said. "Yeah," Sakura assented. "Who's your sensei?" Raida asked. "Kurenai and Asuma are the only 2 I know who passed their teams." "She's one of Kakashi's," Sandame responded, grinning. All 3 Junin froze immediately before turning to look at Sandame in surprise. "You have to joking, he actually passed a team?" Anko said. "He's failed, what, 10 of them already?" "10? Sakura nearly shouted, in surprise. "It wasn't 10, Sandame assured her, it was 9. Technically we didn't give him a choice this time. Her teammate is Uchiha Sasuke and the council wanted him to be taught by Kakashi. Their 3rd teammate is injured at the moment, and they were worried about how that would affect the outcome of his test." They decided unanimously to give the team an automatic pass, Sandame explained. Lucky duck, Anko claimed, moving back around Sakura to finish cutting her hair. So who's the third teammate? I haven't heard of any kids with injuries lately, the one with a toothpick asked. He already told us, Anko stated. No he didn't. He said that one of her teammates is the Uchiha kid, but he didn't give a name for the third one, he retorted. Yes he did Genma. You just aren't paying attention, she said, causing Sandame to chuckle. I should have known you'd figure that out, he said smiling at her. Was I not supposed to? Anko asked. We are keeping the situation quiet for the time being, Sandame informed. Gotcha, I'll keep my mouth shut, Anko promised. Actually, even thought we don't have a clue what they're talking about. We probably shouldn't talk about the autopass, should we? Raida said. It would help, Sandame commented. Right-o, we'll keep our mouths shut and you can run along home, I'm finished. If you get a chance, deck Kakashi one for me. Tell him if he ever cuts a girl's hair again, I'll show him another use I have for kunai, Anko said, patting Sakura on the head. Sakura smiled at her and nodded. I'll tell him. And thanks for the haircut, she added with a nod. Why don't you head back on up to meet Kakashi? Tell him I'll stop by to see him later, Sandame said. Sakura nodded and waved goodbye as she left the room and headed upstairs to Naruto's room. She entered happily and, completely ignoring the curious glances that her teammates gave her, took her time inspecting her new haircut in the mirror. When she turned around she looked at Kakashi and said, he's not back yet. I thought he was with you, Kakashi responded in confusion. He went out to get the food. Hokage-sama offered to have one of the Junin downstairs cut my hair. She wanted me to tell you that if you ever cut a girl's hair again, she'll show you another use she has for kunai. Sakura repeated happily, sitting down next to Sasuke. Naruto snickered as Kakashi scowled at Sakura. Well at least, Iruka being gone gives me the chance to speak with the three of you, he finally said, standing up and turning to face them. There are several things I want to make clear, before we really get started tomorrow. I've evaluated each of you, and I'm sorry to say that I'm not as impressed with you as the council was. I've never passed a team before and, as much as Sandame assured me I would like the three of you, I still have reservations. However, I am willing to put those reservations aside, on the condition that you listen to me and Iruka regardless of what we say. Some of what we teach you and say to you may go against what you have already learned or may go against your personal beliefs. I want your promise that you will think over what we tell you. That includes what I told each of you after I finished testing you. Do we have an agreement? Kakashi asked, looking at each of his surprisingly sober students. After a moment, he gained a reluctant nod from each of them. A moment later Iruka popped in the door. Anybody hungry? He asked with a smile. Naruto woke up on the first day of real training with his team happy to be out of the cramped room by Sandame's office and in a real bedroom. He was even more pleased when Iruka knocked on the door and peeked in. I was just checking to make sure you were up, he said with a smile. Do you want breakfast? He asked, gaining an eager nod from Naruto. Go ahead and get dressed, then come downstairs. The moment Iruka disappeared, Naruto hopped out of bed and quickly got dressed. He adjusted his forehead protector around his neck like Iruka had shown him to cover the scars that still refused to fade. He skidded into the kitchen and blinked when he realized that he and Iruka weren't alone. Pervert, he signed, sitting down next to Kakashi. Nice to see you too, Kakashi retorted, ruffling Naruto's hair. Why are you here? Naruto asked. I was just discussing your training regimen with Iruka, Kakashi told him. What are we doing today? Naruto asked before he began eating. Training, Kakashi answered, gaining a glare from Naruto. No missions? Naruto asked when he had finished eating. Naruto, we told you 3 days ago that you would only be completing the minimum amount of necessary missions. You won't start them for a while yet, Iruka told him. Naruto scowled and stood up. You remember where we're meeting? Kakashi asked, gaining a nod from Naruto. You better hurry up then if you want to get there before me, he said, looking at Naruto nonchalantly. Naruto's eyes widened and he glanced up at the clock before rushing out of the kitchen. When the front door slammed a moment later, Iruka turned to Kakashi with a frown. They don't meet for another 10 minutes and I know for a fact that you won't show up for at least another hour, he accused. Kakashi smirked and shrugged. It'll give them the chance to talk before I arrive, he said. Neither Sakura or Sasuke know enough sign language to fully hold a conversation with Naruto, Iruka countered. They'll figure out something, Kakashi said. He smirked at Iruka's answering growl. On a bridge at the edge of town, two teenagers sat impatiently waiting for their third member and sensei. They looked up when the sound of running reached their ears and saw the orange blur that was their third teammate. You were almost late, Sakura stated, frowning at him. Naruto grinned sheepishly and opened his mouth before quickly shutting it. He repeated the process several more times before he lifted his hands. Both of his teammates watched his hands for the signs that never came. They redirected their gazes to his face when his hands stilled and fell back to his sides. He scowled at them and jumped up to sit on the bridge's railing. Sakura fidgeted after several minutes of silence. It was never quiet when Naruto was around. He had always made a lot of noise, even during class. She hadn't noticed the silence while they were working in the administration building because Iruka had been there and the tower had been lively enough. Sitting on the bridge, the silence from her two teammates was growing oppressive, but she couldn't bring herself to break it. She bit her lip lightly and turned to Sasuke before remembering Kakashi's warning about her attention to the boy. Sakura didn't think Kakashi had meant that she couldn't talk to him, but he probably wouldn't appreciate it if he showed up and found her ignoring Naruto in favor of conversing with Sasuke. Sakura finally put her brain to work and decided that Naruto was the more likely of her two teammates to actually respond, as long as she kept the conversation on areas he could respond to. She hoped Sasuke would join in, or at least pay attention, if she could make the conversation interesting enough. As she continued thinking about conversation topics, she suddenly remembered the Sandame's comment about Mizuki-sensei the day before. She glanced at Naruto cautiously, wondering if he would be able to answer. It probably would have been a lot easier if Iruka would allow Naruto to write, but he claimed that Naruto would never learn if he constantly relied on that. Naruto, Sakura began, catching both of her teammates' attention. Do you know what happened to Mizuki-sensei? He wasn't at the academy the day of orientation and I haven't seen him since graduation day, she said. Technically it wasn't a lie, she hadn't seen him. Naruto stiffened, but Sakura couldn't read his face well enough to tell whether or not he was thinking about how to explain or trying to ignore the topic. After several moments, he hesitantly signed his answer, however, Sakura only recognized, fight. He got into a fight? She asked, trying to clarify. Naruto nodded and signed, with Sensei and me. When? Sakura asked. 10 days ago, Naruto answered. That means it was the day of graduation, Sasuke interrupted. You weren't really failed because of a bias, were you? Sakura stated. Naruto hesitated slightly before finally shaking his head. Then how do they expect you to function on a team with us? Sasuke asked. Naruto snarled and turned towards Sasuke, but Kakashi's hand on his shoulder prevented him from lunging at the dark-haired boy. That's enough, Kakashi stated. Naruto has proven himself more than capable of handling the role of Genin and is the most suitable match for the two of you. How so if he didn't pass the Genin exam? If there wasn't a biased sensei holding him back then it means he doesn't have the skills, Sasuke retorted. Kakashi sighed and turned towards him. Naruto failed the Genin exam because of his Bunshin no Jutsu. He has since learned another jutsu that can replace it, he explained. If you must know all three of you are deficient in some areas, but those will be dealt with during training. Speaking of which, we need to start. Kakashi left the three gaping at him and motioned for them to follow as he walked off. He had wanted to give them the bell test, slightly modified of course, but he supposed he should give them a bit more time to accommodate Naruto's disability. On the off chance that they managed to figure out the real goal of the test, they wouldn't necessarily be able to communicate well enough to do anything. Three rather put-out genin followed their sensei as he continued to lead them through the woods. Sakura frowned as she watched Kakashi nonchalantly walk with his head in his book. He didn't need to remind them repeatedly that he didn't want to be teaching them. She wasn't sure if his attitude towards them was just his personality or if it was part of increased training that Sandame had mentioned. She supposed constantly hearing about their faults was supposed to encourage them to look into them on their own and work to improve them. Sakura vaguely wondered if Ino and the others were hearing the same things from their sensei. Of course that would all depend on whether or not Ino had passed since she hadn't actually had the chance to talk to anyone since orientation. We're here, Kakashi said, stopping short and turning to face them. Sakura glanced around the large clearing they were in before turning back to Kakashi. We're going to take things lightly for today, so start by running a few laps. This type of physical training should be stuff you do on your own, but until I'm satisfied that you will all oversee it. The three glanced at each other before taking off. Kakashi fought the urge not to giggle as the team's dynamics quickly showed themselves through such a simple exercise. Sasuke quickly and easily took the lead, which wasn't surprising considering that his speed had been the best during individual testing. As he continued on with a steady pace, Naruto grew fed up with what Kakashi was sure Naruto saw as Sasuke's attitude. He'd ignore the fact that Naruto was probably right, and began picking up his own pace to match Sasuke's. As soon as the blonde caught up to Sasuke, the older boy sped up his pace just slightly so that he could maintain his lead but not wear himself out too much. Naruto picked up his pace again and the two continued playing tag as they ran laps. Sakura had of course fallen behind. She had initially tried to catch up with the two, but as they continued she was unable to keep up with them and maintain a steady pace. Kakashi wasn't sure if he was more disappointed that she wasn't keeping up with them or that she wasn't even trying to. Sakura seemed to have relegated herself rather early to just watching the other two compete. It wouldn't help team dynamics at all if the girl never tried to improve. She couldn't learn early to let them do all the hard work. Kakashi stopped their running after only 5 laps of the clearing and called them back over to him. Do some push and sit-ups while I think of something else for you to do, he ordered, pulling his book out again. He watched out of the corner of his eye as Naruto once more turned it into a competition. Competition wasn't necessarily a bad thing, after all, he competed constantly with Guy. However, their competition wasn't as equal as his and Guy's. Sasuke was only interested in constantly showing Naruto up and probably wouldn't do well if Naruto ever beat him in anything. Unless Sasuke acknowledged Naruto, the rivalry that the Hokage had been hoping would be useful would be the exact opposite. Alright, that's enough of that, he finally said. Kakashi allowed the three enough time to stand up and stretch before beckoning for them to walk over towards the edge of the forest. Normally I wouldn't start you on this so early, but I don't want to wear you out today. Watch first as I demonstrate, he said before turning to the nearest tree and easily walking up its trunk. While standing on the lowest branch, he looked down into the surprised faces of his students. During individual testing, I noticed that Sasuke and Naruto both struggled with controlling their chakra. Well, Sakura did too, but not as much you two, he told them. He watched Naruto's reaction closely but confusion only briefly flickered across the boy's face. Kakashi could only hope that their talk the day of his testing had sunk in a bit. Of course while he was focusing on Naruto, he didn't miss the blush that graced Sakura's cheeks or the glare that Sasuke sent her way. Bettering your chakra control will make your jutsu better and more efficient, he told them. For those of you with less chakra, he started, glancing at Sakura, your stamina will be increased and you'll be able to last longer in fights. You'll also be able to work to increase your chakra stores. For those of you with too much chakra, learning better chakra control will make your jutsu more efficient because you won't waste chakra on them. He dropped back down to the ground and took out 3 kunai before handing them to them. You can use those to mark your progress, he said. What you need to do is focus your chakra to your feet. You need just the right amount of chakra in order to stick to the tree and not damage it. The 3 stared at him in confusion and he sighed. Get started, he ordered. Sakura was the first to move. She picked up the kunai and brought herself back up into a meditative stance. She closed her eyes and focused on gathering her chakra in her feet. After she was satisfied, she ran towards the tree hoping her momentum would help her get farther up the tree. Kakashi watched in amusement as Sakura made it up several meters before gracefully rebounding off the tree and landing back on the ground. She looked up at the mark she had made and scowled. Sasuke scoffed at her attempt and began gathering his own chakra. He also took a running start just as Sakura began her second attempt. Sakura managed to put a meter between her new and old marks before once again gracefully rebounding. Sasuke was not so fortunate. He made it almost as high as Sakura's first mark before being repelled from the tree as he channeled too much chakra to his feet. He landed smoothly, but turned to glare at the mark he had managed to carve into the tree. He chanced a glance at Sakura's progress and noted the large improvement that she had made in only 2 runs. Sasuke scowled at his own mark and gathered chakra once again before running at the tree. Naruto watched his two teammates in their first attempts and frowned slightly. "You better get started, Naruto," Kakashi urged as he watched Sakura and Sasuke's continued attempts. Naruto steeled his determination and began concentrating on gathering his chakra. He charged towards the tree, but he barely made it 4 steps before he lost his footing and slipped off. Kakashi fought the urge not to giggle as Naruto landed in a heap. He had managed to place a mark about 2 meters off the ground, but it was barely half as far as the other two had gotten with their first tries. Naruto righted himself and Kakashi had a feeling he would be blushing if the boy had been able to vocalize the curses that he could see dancing across his lips. Naruto glanced jealously at Sakura and Sasuke as they continued to progress upwards. Sakura was sitting happily on a branch nearly 5 meters off the ground, waving to Kakashi. "This is easy," she called down to him. "Then keep going until you can't mold chakra anymore," he told her. Naruto glanced at her, before quickly dusting himself off and focusing the chakra towards his feet again. He took off again, but every time he charged the tree he would barely add an inch to his preceding attempt before he would slip off. After half an hour, Naruto stopped his attempts and glared at the tree in front of him. He sighed and glanced over at Sasuke only to realize that although the boy was making more progress than him, his efforts were beginning to plateau. Sakura was still easily making it up the tree, but she was beginning to look a bit winded from the constant chakra usage. He heard giggling behind him and looked back to see Kakashi reading his perverted book. After a moment's hesitation, he pocketed his kunai and walked over to Kakashi. "I need help," he signed after he had managed to gain Kakashi's attention. He thought for a moment before adding, "I can't go any farther." Kakashi looked up and examined the 3 trees, comparing Naruto's progress with Sakura and Sasuke's. Sakura had progressed by leaps and bounds compared to the other two, but she was showing far more weariness than the other two and looked like she could use a break. "Sakura needs a break. Ask her for some tips," Kakashi suggested, looking back down at Naruto. The blonde looked up at him like he was stupid before finally signing, "How? Shouldn't she be able to understand that by now?" Kakashi asked. Naruto shook his head in response. We might have to change how they're learning things a bit," he pondered. "Sakura, come over here and take a break," he said, catching the girl's attention. While she walked over, he turned back to Naruto and said, "Work for a bit longer and then I'll have her give you some hints." Naruto pouted and squinted up at him for a moment before walking away and beginning his exercises again. Sakura made her way over to Kakashi as he dismissed Naruto. It really wasn't a surprise that Naruto had already tried to give up, especially considering the progress he had, or hadn't, made. He grumbled silently to himself and went back to work, barely making it to his previous record before slipping again. He barely managed to reverse his fall in time to land on his feet. She shook her head and turned back to Kakashi as he coughed lightly to catch her attention. "Since you were so successful, I want you to help Naruto and Sasuke. None of you are leaving training until all 3 of you have reached the top of the tree and left the kunai there," he told her, smiling beneath his mask. "What happened to not wanting us to wear ourselves out?" she asked. He smiled down at her and chuckled. "I changed my mind. Rest up a bit and give them some pointers, then get back to work. You'll probably reach the top first anyways, but you can't leave until they have as well," Kakashi stated. Sakura grumbled and walked back over. "Hold on a second, Sasuke, Naruto," she said, stopping the two from charging at the trees. "What do you want?" Sasuke asked impatiently. "Are you going to help us?" Naruto asked. Sakura only caught one of the hand signs, but she nodded anyways. "Kakashi-sensei says we can't leave until all 3 of us make it to the top of the tree," she informed them. Naruto's eyes widened and he turned to glare at Kakashi several meters away. He once again made a sign that Kakashi was sure Iruka hadn't taught the boy, not that he was paying attention anyways. "Forget about him for now. The important thing is completing the exercises," Sakura said, forcing him to turn around and look at him. She pointed up at the 3 trees they had been climbing for the past half hour. "Each of these trees is about 15 meters tall. I've been stopping at about 10 meters because there's a convenient branch, but I can probably make the top in about 10 minutes if I rest before I try again," she told them. She directed Naruto to his tree. "You've made it up about 6 meters. That means that you aren't concentrating hard enough. There aren't any indentations on the tree like there are on Sasuke's. That means you're losing your footing because you aren't using enough chakra and Sasuke's using too much, so the tree cracks under his feet and repels him off, she explained to Naruto. Kakashi listened in as Sakura gave Naruto pointers on concentration. Sasuke was watching and listening intently, but he had a feeling that if either Naruto or Sakura turned around to look at him, Sasuke would pretend to be ignoring them. He was also proud that Sakura had managed to hide criticism and pointers for Sasuke in her speech to Naruto. It was a smart move since he wasn't likely to listen to her if she had offered help directly to him. Hopefully Sasuke would be smart enough to shove his pride a bit deeper and take what she was saying seriously. Over the next 2 hours, Kakashi saw a significant improvement in both Naruto and Sasuke's performance. Both had made it past 10 meters, so he was hoping they would be finished by nightfall. If they hadn't, hopefully Iruka would bring something to eat because he was starving, and Kakashi was sure the 3 genin were as well. Sakura was sitting under her tree resting and watching Naruto and Sasuke. Just like she had said, after resting for about 10 minutes she had made it up to the top of the tree and lodged her kunai into the trunk before dropping onto the branch 5 meters below and then onto the ground. Sakura's stomach began protesting around 4 in the afternoon, and she glared at her teammates as they continued to fall short of their goal. An hour later, Naruto and Sasuke were severely winded and scratched up from their falls. Both were dusted with dirt from the number of times that they had landed roughly on the ground and kicked up dust. They were hungry, sweaty, and exhausted from working for so long. Naruto glared over at Sasuke and then at the trees. They had managed to stay nearly even ever since Sakura had offered them pointers earlier that afternoon. They each only had about a meter to go, but they had been stuck at the same spot for nearly half an hour, and the deep grooves in the tree showed just how many times they had nicked the same area. "Hurry up," Sakura whined as her stomach growled loudly. She had been practicing on and off ever since she had left her kunai at the top of the tree, but she hadn't been able to make it up more than 2 meters in the past half hour, so she had given up and remained seated at the foot of the tree. Naruto and Sasuke looked like crap and she knew they were trying their hardest, but she was damn hungry and felt they should be trying even harder. She gaped as Sasuke took off and barely managed to make it to his previous height before his footing slipped and he dropped back down. He knelt panting and glaring at the tree as he tried to catch his breath enough for another run. The pink-haired genin rolled her head to the side so that she could glance at Kakashi out of the corner of her eye. He was still reading his stupid book, even though it looked like he hadn't turned a page the entire afternoon. Unless he had managed to sneak off to lunch at some point, then there was no way that he had eaten all day either. Maybe his mission experience had prepared him for spending longer amounts of time without food, but just because he could last longer without food didn't mean he wasn't hungry after not eating all day. Kakashi giggled as he felt Sakura glaring at him lazily. He glanced down at his watch. They were supposed to have headed back 45 minutes before. Hopefully Iruka would get worried enough that he would come looking for Naruto. If he did that, he could probably be swindled into bringing them dinner so that Naruto and Sasuke could take a break and regain enough strength to finish. The sound of stomping caught his attention, and he looked up to see Naruto taking his frustration out on the ground. He glanced up at the tree and wasn't surprised to see that both Naruto and Sasuke were losing height as they continued. By now they were so tired and hungry that they couldn't keep enough concentration on what they were doing. "Calm down," Sasuke ordered, shocking the other 2 members of Team 7. "The more aggravated you get, the more difficult it's going to be for you to climb and the longer we'll have to stay here." Naruto gaped at the other boy for a moment before straightening up. Before turning back to the tree, he nodded once at Sasuke and grinned apologetically at Sakura. Naruto closed his eyes and concentrated for a moment before charging at the tree almost in tandem with Sasuke. Kakashi lowered his book slightly, hoping this would be their last run. Sure enough, they managed to slam their kunai into the tree trunks right before they lost their footing for the final time. Kakashi slipped his book back into its pocket and disappeared. He reappeared a moment later to catch the 2 boys as they plummeted towards the ground. Kakashi landed a moment later and Sakura walked over towards him. "Can they come to dinner now?" Iruka asked, walking towards them. Naruto's eyes lit up as Kakashi set him down and he looked up expectantly. "Yeah, training is done for today," Kakashi answered. "Good," Iruka responded, turning to the 3 genin. "Sakura, the Hokage wanted me to tell you that your father will be home tomorrow morning. His team was slightly delayed by their clients." If you and Sasuke would like, you're welcome to join us for dinner, he offered. Okay, Sakura answered, eager to get anything, even ramen. Sasuke nodded after an encouraging glare from Kakashi. How generous of you, Iruka-sensei, Kakashi commented as they walked back towards the village. What do you mean? You're the one paying for your students, Iruka retorted with a straight face. Kakashi was left gaping as three giggling genin followed Iruka. He vowed to make their next day of training even more hellish as they sat through dinner, occasionally smirking at him. The next morning Kakashi was so excited that he forgot to arrive late. He frowned as he walked up when he realized that at the rate he was going he would never get to annoy his genin with the excuses he had spent the past week preparing just for them. He supposed he'd have the chance to do so the next week if all went according to plan. Of course, a lot of that depended on whether or not anyone could keep their mouths shut around Iruka. Kakashi lazily waved for Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura to follow him as he walked away from the bridge. They entered the training ground and Kakashi glanced around cautiously to make sure that Iruka wasn't there to yell at him yet. Kotetsu and Azuma weren't exactly great at keeping their schemes quiet, and he was fairly certain they were working with Iruka the entire morning in the mission office. When he was satisfied, Kakashi turned back to the genin and told them, "Today I want to start by checking your inventory. It's very important that you start playing to your strengths, but you also need to be prepared for everything. As a team, you can divide what you need between the three of you, but I have a feeling that since you're just out of the academy all you've got is the basics and maybe one or two custom pieces. So, show me what you've got." The three genin unhooked their kunai and shuriken pouches and emptied their contents onto the ground for him to see. He was actually surprised to see all three pull a few more shuriken or kunai out of other places. Kakashi looked down at the supplies in front of him and fought the urge to snicker as he ordered them to run laps while he went over their caches. An hour later, he decided they had done enough and called them back over. He handed each of them a water bottle and told them have a seat. Sakura and Sasuke gulped the water down thirstily and Kakashi fought the urge not to cackle. Naruto uncapped his own bottle and took a large drink before throwing the bottle away and gagging. He glared at Kakashi and tried to find the right signs to yell at him for the foul-tasting water. Kakashi smirked, wondering how Naruto had managed to taste drug he had slipped into the water bottles. Rule number 1 of Shinobi, one Naruto should have already learned. Never trust someone just because they're your superior, Kakashi said as Sakura and Sasuke sank to the ground. He helped Naruto follow a moment later with a quick chop to the back of the neck. The last thing Naruto heard was Kakashi chuckling. Day 1. Sasuke woke up with a pounding headache and cursed Kakashi. He looked around and spotted Naruto and Sakura off to his right. He wasn't surprised when he checked for his weapons only to see that Kakashi hadn't returned them before dumping the three genin wherever they were. Sasuke stood up and stretched, looking around before doing a double take. He took in a deep breath as he realized what he was seeing. He released the breath and walked over to his teammates, roughly shaking them awake. Naruto shot up and looked at Sasuke frantically before his jaw dropped. "I don't know where we are," Sasuke told him. "There's sand in my hair," Sakura growled, looking to her teammates for answers. "What did that stupid sensei do to us?" "He drugged us," Naruto signed, but neither Sakura nor Sasuke understood the signs. Naruto glared at the two before his face brightened slightly. He walked forward down the beach towards the wetter sand and wrote, "drugged." Sakura saw what he was doing and walked forward to see what he had written. "He drugged us," Sakura repeated, making sure she had understood Naruto. "It must have been in the water. He took all of our weapons as well," Sasuke told her. Naruto shook his head frantically and pointed at a small pile of objects at the edge of the tree line about 10 meters behind them. Sasuke turned around to look at what Naruto had seen and walked towards it while Sakura and Naruto followed. The three knelt down to inspect Kakashi's generous parting gift of 3 kunai, 4 scrolls, and 3 wristbands. Sakura scowled and picked up the kunai, handing one each to Naruto and Sasuke before tucking her own into the waistband of her shorts. She glared at the scroll on the top of the pile. "That man has a sick sense of humor," she thought as she read the bold note. "Read this first," was printed on the outside of the scroll next to what she assumed was Kakashi's version of a smiley face. "Might as well do what it says," Sasuke muttered. Sakura reached forward and picked it up, slowly unrolling it. "Sakura, since I'm sure you're the one reading this, I'd like you to relay several bits of information to Naruto and Sasuke. First, the island you are stranded on is 1 kilometer from shore. Do not attempt the swim as there are very vicious fish inhabiting the water surrounding you. The good news is that all of these fish are edible and a wonderful source of protein. Second, the wristbands are to be worn at all times while the 3 of you are on the island. I will know if you take them off, and you will not like what happens if you do. They are for your safety as well because they will alert me if you die. Third, the other 3 scrolls contain the following. Further instruction in sign language for all 3 of you. Training instructions for the 3 of you to follow during your stay on the island. A surprise. Do not open this one for another 2 weeks. I would recommend finding a way to keep track of time, because if you open that scroll too early I'll know, and I won't be happy. Last, have fun. Sakura glared at the scroll before dropping it and picking up the 3rd scroll, marked instructions, and opening it as well. While she did that, Naruto leaned forward and snatched up the 3 wristbands. He slipped one of them on his arm and handed the others to Sasuke and Sakura to do the same. Sasuke sneered at the band and placed it reluctantly around his own wrist. I hate him, Sakura stated, staring at the scroll in horror and then glancing to the wristband she had just slipped on. She tossed the scroll to Sasuke and began clawing at the wristband trying to pull it off. That pervert. Telling us we couldn't take these things off was pointless if they were designed to suck up all our chakra and use that as glue so they can't be removed. Let me get this straight. These things bind our chakra so that we can't use jutsu while we're here, Sasuke stated. Apparently all of our training while we're on the island is taijutsu, Sakura agreed, looking back over at the scroll. We're supposed to spar each other every day, combined with laps and other exercises. I can't believe he wants us to run around this whole island so many times, she muttered. Naruto glanced up at the sky and noticed that it was getting late in the afternoon. He startled Sakura and Sasuke when he tapped them on the shoulder, but once he had their attention he signed, "What next?" Sakura looked at him blankly, and his inquisitive look turned to a scowl. He couldn't understand how they still couldn't understand something that he knew Uruka had taught them. He jabbed his finger at the sun's position hoping they would figure out what was going on their own. It's getting late, we should make sure we're prepared for the night, Sasuke stated. Right, we'll need a fire, and food, and some type of shelter for at least tonight. We can work on something more permanent tomorrow. For tonight at least we should probably stay out here. Tomorrow or the day after we'll explore the island more fully, but we shouldn't wander into it. Right, Sasuke-kun? Sakura said. Sasuke scowled at her change in demeanor but nodded in agreement. One of us should look for food while the others get firewood and see if there's anything that can be used for a temporary shelter, he added. The main problem will be starting the fire. With our jutsu disabled we'll have to start it by hand, but we don't have any matches, flint or other tools. Sasuke drifted off when Naruto tugged on his sleeve. The blonde pointed to his kunai and held out his hand expectantly. Naruto, you already have 1 kunai, you don't need more than that, Sakura chided. Let me borrow your kunai and I'll see if pervert was telling the truth about the fish, Naruto signed in explanation. All I caught in that was, kunai, and, pervert, Sasuke told him. Naruto turned to Sakura hopefully but she looked just as lost as Sasuke. I recognized, borrow, as well, but we already knew that you were asking for the kunai, she told him. Naruto pouted pitifully as he tried to come up with another way to explain. He finally reached down for the scroll and pointed to the section where Kakashi mentioned the vicious yet edible fish and then back at the kunai. I need more than 1, he claimed, hoping they would understand. You're going to try and get some fish? So you want more than 1 kunai to use? Sakura asked, hoping she had understood what he was trying to tell them. He nodded and Sakura let out a sigh of relief. There's no harm in trying, but if they're vicious enough to keep us on the island then I don't know how you're going to catch any, she told him. Sasuke and I will see if there's anything in the interior, we'll be back in 30 minutes. Don't leave the beach, she added as she and Sasuke handed him their kunai and walked off along the edge of the tree line. When they came back about half an hour later, Naruto was sitting impatiently next to the scrolls. 3 fish were speared on the kunai waiting to be cooked. There wasn't anything that would really be useful in making a shelter, at least not anything that we could throw together before the sun sets tonight. We might find something tomorrow if we go farther in, Sakura told him as Sasuke set up about arranging the wood for a fire. He handed Naruto 3 thinner sticks to put the fish on before turning back to the wood and trying to figure out how to light the fire. Naruto rolled his eyes and handed the sticks to Sakura. He removed the fish from the kunai and handed them to her as well. She looked at him in confusion but shrugged it off and took them. While Sakura prepared the fish for roasting, Naruto took off his jacket and turned it inside out. He caught Sasuke's attention as he began feeling around for something in the lining. When he had found what he was looking for, he undid some of the stitches in the hem and reached inside the lining, before drawing out what looked like several matches, but the sticks were flimsy, which explained how they had stayed inside Naruto's coat and never broken or shown through. Naruto walked to the edge of the beach and disappeared for a moment before coming back with a handful of grass and leaves. He placed the smaller kindling underneath the wood Sasuke had organized and struck the match on the bottom of his boot. He carefully guarded the flame as he led it to the kindling. Once that was lit, he walked back to the woods and grabbed more so that they could keep the fire going until the larger pieces lit. Once he had made the second trip, Sakura and Sasuke had caught on and they joined him at the edge of the tree line picking up dried kindling. Once they had gathered a good amount, Sakura sat down by the small fire and continued feeding it as the larger pieces began to catch. "I doubt it was your own idea to sew matches into your jacket," Sasuke stated, too proud to actually ask for the information he wanted to know. Naruto glared at him but answered anyways, "Sensei did it. We'll need more wood to last through the night. I'll stay here and make sure this lights properly and start the fish, but you two should find more. Make sure you don't go too far from the beach," Sakura told them. Naruto grinned and nodded to her before following Sasuke back away from the beach. They had made several more trips and Sakura promised that if they made one more, the fish would be ready. Naruto happily walked away and Sasuke followed, rolling his eyes. The dark-haired boy walked back onto the beach several minutes later and added his load to the large pile for the night. As he sat down on the other side of the fire, Sakura handed a fish to Sasuke and the two waited silently for their third member to come back. A moment later, a crashing noise came from the trees behind them. Naruto broke away from the tree line and rushed towards them, repeatedly looking back at the woods he had just exited. He dropped onto the ground next to them and began frantically signing the same thing over and over again. Sakura watched his behavior with growing alarm and finally pulled him over to the wet sand on the beach and told him to write it. "Monster," Naruto wrote, glancing back towards the forest in alarm. "What do you mean?" Sakura asked. He held up his kunai and showed her the trail of blood along one edge. "What did you do, trip and cut yourself on it?" Sasuke asked wryly, walking up close enough to see the blood. Naruto frantically shook his head and pointed at the message he had written for Sakura. "Did you kill something out there?" Sakura asked. Naruto shook his head again. "I was attacked. It was huge, but I managed to hit its arm and it went away," he told them. Sakura watched intently and was happy that she could understand most of what he had said. "If it went away, then it probably won't pursue you out here. You might have treaded on some animal's territory out there, so we'll be careful to avoid it tomorrow," she claimed. Naruto gaped at her and watched in confusion as Sasuke and Sakura walked back to the fire and the food they had left there. "Come on Naruto, eat," Sakura called to him. Naruto glanced warily at the tree line and cautiously walked over to join them. He refused to sit with his back to the trees and shot the darkening area frantic glances every few minutes. That night they slept huddled around the fire. At Naruto's insistence, which took him nearly half an hour to get across to Sasuke and Sakura, they kept a guard awake at all times. When Sakura was woken to take her shift at what was probably close to 4 or 5, she grumbled and occasionally sent glares at Naruto's sleeping form. She stopped glaring when she realized that even asleep he didn't look like he was getting much more rest than her. In fact, if the coughing meant anything, Sakura was fairly sure that Naruto was getting sick. Maybe he didn't dry off fast enough when he was finished fishing earlier, she thought, shrugging and turning back to put a bit more wood on the fire. Day 2. An hour later, the sky was beginning to grow light and Sakura was beginning to nod off. A loud popping noise shook her from her doze. Sakura jumped but quickly realized it was just the fire and was settling back in when she heard a sharp crack from her left. She spun around and tried to see inside the woods. Her breath hitched when she saw a large shadow dart through the trees and she stood up, pulling out a kunai while taking a step closer to Sasuke. Naruto had begun coughing again behind her and she winced as a particularly harsh one escaped his lips. She glanced along the edge of the trees for as far as she could see, but there were no more signs of whatever had alerted her. Sakura didn't notice that Naruto's coughing had stopped and was taken completely by surprise when the blonde boy tapped her on the shoulder. "What is it?" he asked. She blinked at him for a moment before shaking her head. She glanced back at the woods once and shrugged it off. "This is all Kakashi-sensei's fault. He has me so stressed out that I'm seeing things," she fumed, setting a few more sticks on the fire. She turned back to see Naruto watching her in confusion. He finally moved his hands in a sign that Sakura recognized from earlier. "No, I didn't see your monster," she told him exasperatedly. Naruto looked at her suspiciously for a moment before sighing. "I'll go get some food," he told her. At least she assumed that's what he was telling her. She really needed to spend some time with that scroll on sign language that Kakashi had left them. Maybe she and Sasuke would learn quicker if they didn't allow each other to speak while they were on the island or something like that. "Just make sure to dry yourself off quickly this time. I think you might be getting sick and it won't help us if you're sick while we're here," she warned him. Naruto shot her a bemused look but shrugged it off. He started towards Sasuke to wake the other boy up but Sakura intercepted him. "Let Sasuke-kun sleep. He was up most of the night keeping watch at your insistence," she told him. Naruto scowled at her and looked like he wanted to protest. Sakura wasn't sure if he didn't because her glare scared him or if he thought it was futile because she wouldn't be able to understand him anyway. She watched as he shuffled away, kicking up a great deal of sand as he went. He shrugged off the majority of his clothing and Sakura blinked in shock. She raised her hand to brush through her hair and realized that her forehead protector was gone. "That's why I never saw them before," she realized. He wore his forehead protector around his neck. She shuddered slightly and turned away quickly. She was used to seeing scars on older shinobi and even some of her friends bore inconsequential scars from training accidents. But it was more than obvious that Naruto's didn't come from any sort of accident. They also weren't exactly what one would call inconsequential. Naruto returned 15 minutes later with 3 fish just like the night before. His jacket and shirt were back in place and Sakura had to admit that she was relieved when she noticed the scars were mainly hidden. Naruto handed Sakura the fish and while she was busy he snuck over to annoy Sasuke. He grabbed one of the sticks near the fire and reached over to poke the other boy. Sasuke reached out and grabbed the stick from him before it could hit and Naruto pointed at him and opened his mouth to yell accusingly. Sasuke raised an eyebrow condescendingly as Naruto continued to flounder about wordlessly. The blonde finally came to rest several feet from Sasuke and plopped down. He crossed his arms and turned away pouting and refusing to look at either of his teammates. Sakura glanced over when she realized that Sasuke was sitting up and turned to Naruto angrily. "Didn't I say not to wake him up?" she accused. Naruto turned to gape at her and frantically signed what she was sure was an excuse, but she didn't catch any of what he said. "At least this time I don't have to feel bad about not understanding him. He's so flustered that I'm pretty sure he's messing up on his own." She rolled her eyes at him and went back to turning the fish over the fire. "This'll take a bit longer," she told them after she had gotten sick of the stifling silence that had descended upon them. "Why don't the two of you spar and get that out of the way? The earlier we finish the exercises he set out for us the faster we'll be able to search the island." Naruto turned to glare at Sasuke but the dark-haired boy simply ignored him and stood up. Sasuke moved farther down the beach and waited stoically for Naruto to join him. "Hurry up, Dobi," Sasuke called out as Naruto sluggishly made his way over. Naruto glared at him but continued at his slow pace. At this point sparring with Sakura would be better than this, Sasuke said disdainfully. Naruto stopped about 5 feet away and then lunged at the other boy, snarling. Sakura rolled her eyes as their sparring match turned into a wrestling competition. She sincerely hoped that Kakashi wasn't watching this because she wasn't sure if he'd count what they were doing as constructively working on their combat skills. Sasuke cursed and recoiled when Naruto's harmless grappling turned into a fistful of sand in his eyes. Naruto used his moment of blindness to land a punch to Sasuke's right eye. Sasuke lashed out in return and, still blind, tackled Naruto to the ground where they resumed their grappling. However, Naruto maintained an advantage because Sasuke couldn't stop to rub his eyes and the sand continued to cause irritation which created blind spots. Naruto landed 5 more hits that Sasuke knew were going to leave nasty bruises, and he wasn't sure if he had managed to return the favor with any significant blows. Sakura finally broke up their spar and told them to come eat. Naruto immediately made his way over to her and sat down, gratefully accepting the fish she handed him. He began eating smugly as Sasuke limped over to them. Sasuke couldn't quite remember when Naruto had landed a kick on his knee, but it hurt like hell. After eating, Sakura suggested that they run the laps Kakashi had told them to, so that they could get a feel for the size of the island. After that they could complete the sparring and explore the island a bit more in hopes of finding a spot for a more permanent camp. Without reason to argue, both boys agreed and they took off. The island itself couldn't be more than 1.5 kilometers in circumference, and they had seen at least 2 streams that seemed to cross through the island in an X shape. They passed their camp for the 4th time and prepared to finish their last lap when Naruto stopped and added more wood to the dying fire, before allowing them to move on. They returned to find that someone had put the fire out, with water judging by the wet sand surrounding the messy ashes that were all that was left of their fire. "Do you still have a match or 2 left?" Sakura asked, turning to Naruto. He nodded and pulled several matches out of his pocket to show her. "Hold on to those no matter what," she instructed him. "Let's hurry up and finish the rest of the stuff Kakashi-sensei wanted us to do, and then we'll move inward. Naruto, while Sasuke and I spar, catch as many fish as you can. We'll take them with us," she added. "Then while you and I are sparring, Sasuke can collect more wood to take with us. That way we won't have to spend time looking for it later." Naruto nodded and they all went their own way. Within an hour they were ready to move out, and Sakura suggested that they follow one of the streams so that they wouldn't have to worry about coming to the beach as often. They had been walking for a while when Sasuke stopped short. Sakura and Naruto quickly moved up to his side, but he simply pointed down at the damp mud they were walking through. Sakura moved in front of the 2 boys and bent down to inspect the footprint that Sasuke had found. Naruto curiously leaned down next to her and tried to size up the print by comparing it to his own foot. The footprint was at least 3 times as large as his own foot, and it hadn't been made by anything human, unless that human had been born with only 4 toes, and what looked like a claw in the back. "Why is this the only one in the area?" Sakura asked aloud. Naruto pantomimed walking and then stretched his arms as wide as he could, but Sakura and Sasuke looked at him dumbly. "I know that wasn't actual sign language and I have no clue what you were trying to tell us," Sakura told him. Naruto's proud smile quickly turned into a scowl and he turned away from his teammates for a moment before quickly turning back. He knelt down and splashed some of the water from the stream onto the mud and then wrote, "Long stride," before pointing to a second footprint in the middle of the stream. "Actually, you could have signed that and both of us would have understood it," Sakura told him a bit apologetically. Naruto glared at Sasuke, despite the fact that he hadn't been the one to say it, and jabbed his finger again at the second print in the stream. "Whatever this was past here heading towards the beach," Sasuke stated. "And this doesn't look that old. We should be careful until we figure out just what's on the island." "It's a monster," Naruto told them as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Sasuke scoffed at him, but Sakura wasn't so inclined to ignore his claims anymore. She glanced around at their surroundings and sighed. "We should keep going," she told them. About an hour later they found an area that Sasuke and Sakura thought would suit their needs. It wasn't too far from the small streams, so they would have water nearby and they'd be able to make it back to the beach easily. "First things first, let's rebuild the fire. I don't really see what we'd manage to do for shelter. Hopefully the trees will provide some if it rains," she told them, placing the scrolls on the ground. They quickly went about gathering enough kindling and setting up the fire. When it was set up properly, Naruto pulled out a match and lit it. With almost extreme care, he slowly moved the match to light the kindling, making sure that a stray breeze didn't come along and extinguish it. When the kindling was lit, and Naruto was occupied with slowly adding more to it, Sakura turned to examine their supplies. "It won't kill us to eat fish for a while, but we really have no clue how long Kakashi-sensei intends to leave us here. It would probably be best if we take time over the next few days to see if there are any other animals or edible plants on the island. Gathering wood in general won't be a problem, but if it rains we'll need something to put over the fire to guard it, and it could make it difficult to find dry wood." So we should make sure we always have more than a day's supply of wood and find a way to cover it with something to keep it relatively dry, Sakura thought, trying to remember everything she had learned from Iruka about survival. Her train of thought was lost when she heard a branch snap off to her left. Any doubts about Naruto's monster were driven from Sakura and Sasuke's minds as they saw what was crouching on a tree branch at the edge of their clearing. "Whatever you do, don't let it put the fire out," Sasuke whispered, moving his kunai in front of him defensively. Naruto slowly placed the remaining matches securely in his pocket and pulled out his kunai. Sakura took out her kunai and inched towards the fire, checking to make sure the small fire was okay as she did so. The creature in the tree watched them curiously for a moment before dropping to the ground. Sasuke and Sakura stood up, but Naruto remained crouched next to the fire. The thing was a lot easier to see in the afternoon sunlight. It had to be close to 8 feet tall, and its shoulders were at least as wide as he was tall. Just like the footprints they had found suggested, the creature had 4 toes on the front of the foot and an odd talon-like digit on the back. It had brown leathery hide and sparse, but coarse-looking patches of fur or hair on its body. Its neck was elongated and had a small ridge of even coarser-looking hair along it that trailed down the back. The head was like no animal Naruto had ever seen. It was small and circular in shape with 2 huge bulging eyes, and Naruto could only hope that that meant the brain inside of it was small and stupid. The mouth was a thin line, but Naruto could see the ridges of sharp teeth protruding from the top jaw. The 4 had sat there staring at each other for what seemed like several minutes when all of a sudden the creature lunged towards Sakura. She hopped out of the way. Surprisingly enough, it followed her. Sakura dodged again as the creature swung one of its clawed hands towards her head. Its feet kicked up dust as it ran forwards, and Naruto's eyes widened when he realized the dirt was causing the fire to splutter. He quickly set more grass and leaves, hoping to keep it going until the larger wood caught. Naruto glanced at Sasuke and saw him preparing to dash towards the monster. He stood up as Sasuke took off and jumped towards Sakura, who had been struggling to dodge all of the creature's attacks. Sasuke stabbed forward with his kunai, hoping to drive the beast backwards. He succeeded somewhat, but after a moment of avoiding Sasuke's attacks, it merely jumped over him and towards Naruto and Sakura. Sakura screamed and moved away, but Naruto stood his ground and struck forward with his kunai. He missed the hit and had to duck in between the thing's legs. While behind it, he jumped up attempting to land a kick on the back of its head. The large creature spun around and batted Naruto away while he was still in midair. Naruto hit the ground with a thud and skidded backwards straight through the small fire and into one of the trees. He sat up and rushed back over to where the fire had been, once he was sure that Sasuke and Sakura were keeping the creature busy. He focused on gathering up as much of it as he could. Naruto was happy to find that some of the smaller pieces hadn't actually been extinguished, so he put them together and added some more, allowing it to quickly rekindle. Sticking his burnt thumb into his mouth, he stood up and saw that the beast had kept its attention on Sakura and Sasuke the whole time. He moved slowly around the fire while Sasuke was fighting it and prepared to throw his kunai at it, when the creature stopped its attacks and jumped up through the trees, disappearing. He blinked and looked around in confusion. Sasuke was looking up at the canopy of the trees expectantly, but nothing happened. They stood in silence for almost 5 minutes and the monster failed to return. "Are you alright, Naruto?" Sakura asked, looking over. She was surprised to see that he had already managed to repair the damage to the fire that his fall had caused. Naruto nodded and signed. "It only attacked you too. Maybe it decided you weren't worth its time after you ran away from it yesterday," Sasuke taunted. Naruto growled, but Sakura sent a glare his way and he backed down slightly. "The good thing is that it didn't manage to put out the fire," she said. "It didn't go after the fire," Naruto told them, but neither of his teammates was paying attention to his hands and they missed the signs. He sighed in frustration and looked back down at the thumb he had burned. He blinked when he realized that it didn't hurt anymore and the skin looked perfectly fine. It wasn't odd for him to heal quickly, but normally the little things didn't heal that quickly. "We need to set up camp better so that it can't attack as easily. The fire needs to be put in a place that's accessible but harder to put out, so it definitely needs something over it. And we should make sure that we always have dry wood available, so we should have some here and cover it with something," Sakura decided. Naruto blinked at her and turned to Sasuke, surprised to see that he was nodding in agreement. "Aren't we going to do something about that thing?" he asked. When he realized that neither of his teammates had noticed for a second time, he marched up to Sakura and tapped her on the shoulder. Naruto helped Sasuke gather more firewood. "I'll try to figure out what to do with the fire here," she told him, without turning around. Naruto growled slightly and turned to Sasuke to try him, but he was quickly ignored. "Let's go Dobi," Sasuke said to him, walking out of the clearing. Naruto mouthed the nickname and glared in Sasuke's direction before taking off in the opposite direction. Neither of his teammates seemed to notice. Sasuke continued on his way and Sakura began examining the clearing, trying to figure out a way to protect the fire. Over the next hour Sasuke returned every 15 or so minutes with another load of wood, and Sakura began to become suspicious when Naruto didn't return once. After his fifth load Sakura stopped him and told him to look for Naruto instead. By the time Sasuke returned an hour later, and without Naruto, Sakura had dug out a fire pit and done what she could to cover some of the wood he had gathered. "Where is he?" Sakura asked, turning around to face him. "I can't find him," Sasuke answered, not really looking her in the eye. Instead he turned to inspect the small clearing he had chosen. "Where could he be?" Sakura asked. "How the hell could he not find him? Naruto wears orange for Cripe's sake. And the island isn't that big," she wondered as Sasuke continued to ignore her. "Well, we can't just leave him out there, can we?" she asked, looking at him for answers. "Kakashi-sensei's going to kill us if we lose Naruto," she thought pathetically. "He'll come back before it gets dark," Sasuke told her. He ignored the pink-haired girl as she spluttered in response and turned to add more wood onto the fire. "Back by dark?" Sakura muttered darkly, later that night after the two had eaten and were preparing to settle in. "It's too late to search for him again tonight. We'll have to find him tomorrow," Sasuke stated. Sakura froze and laughed nervously. He wasn't supposed to hear that, she thought despondently. "This is all Naruto's fault. Now he's got me worried and insulting Sasuke-kun." Day 3. Naruto woke up and stretched, making sure not to fall out of the tree he had spent the night in. He wondered when his teammates would realize that he was barely 50 feet from them, but he didn't feel like giving himself up. Doing so before they found him would be too boring. He climbed, the normal way, to the top of the tree and noticed that the sun was just rising, and that meant his teammates probably wouldn't wake for some time. Instead of waiting around, he took off on his own towards the nearby stream to get a drink and maybe find something other than fish for his teammates to eat. A gift might make them a bit less angry at him, even though it was their fault that he had left in the first place. He had just finished splashing his face with water when he noticed an odd reflection in the ripples he had left behind. As the ripples faded and he realized what he was looking at, his eyes widened and he forced himself to slowly turn towards the figure standing in the tree behind him. It didn't seem to be preparing to pounce or anything, it was just watching him curiously. Experimentally, Naruto took a step to his left, farther upstream from the monster but not into the stream, and when the monster did nothing he took a second and then a third. He managed 6 steps, moving steadily back towards their campsite, before the monster moved, jumping over Naruto's head and landing in another tree, effectively blocking Naruto's escape. Naruto frowned at the monster that still refused to attack or even show any hostility. This time he decided to just be direct and he took several steps forward, hoping the monster would just let him leave. However, when he was just 3 feet away from the tree the monster was sitting in it growled at him and dropped down from the branch to stand in his way. Naruto cautiously backed away, not wanting to risk being hit by the monster like he had been the night before. When he was standing in front of the stream again, the monster was apparently satisfied that Naruto wasn't going to try and escape, so it jumped back up to his perch and settled down. Naruto sighed in annoyance and looked around inquisitively. If he had been back where he had started he would have been able to cross the stream easily enough, and then, if the beast wasn't as fast as it looked, he might have stood a chance of losing it in the forest. As it was, the stream behind him looked deeper and much wider than the neck to his right. In order to cross he would have to swim either to the other shore or to the shallower neck. Either way would give the monster too much time to catch up to him. As the monster continued to watch him, Naruto grew bored and finally sat down, throwing a baleful glare in the thing's direction as he did so and signing, "I should name you pervert too. You're as annoying him." He sat up a bit straighter when the monster seemed to momentarily lose its balance. When it righted itself, its head was ducked and its shoulders were shaking as if it was laughing. That's just creepy, Naruto thought, settling back down as the monster didn't make another move. He was still there 2 hours later when voices from the forest behind the monster told Naruto that his teammates were awake and heading his way. He stood up slowly and noticed that the monster seemed to have been alerted to their presence as well. Glancing around, Naruto tried to find something to throw so that he could alert his teammates to what they were walking into. With the only rocks being in the stream itself and too far away for the monster to let him move, he took out his kunai instead. "Well, where all did you look last night?" Sakura asked loudly. Apparently the monster didn't like her tone as it repositioned itself to move towards her. Its jump was halted when Naruto's kunai hit the trunk of the tree it was standing on just inches from its nose. It angrily turned its attention to him and away from the two genin that had appeared 10 feet away. "Okay, weaponless with a giant monster angry at me. Maybe I should have just let it eat them," Naruto thought as the monster landed on the forest floor and took a step towards Naruto, completely ignoring his surprised teammates. What an idiot. Definitely should have let it eat them, he thought after hearing Sasuke's annoyed statement. Naruto took another step away from the monster, making sure that he avoided the water, and when it took a step towards him, Naruto turned and ran. He could hear the monster moving behind him and tried to move off towards the trees, but the monster lunged towards him precariously and Naruto only avoided being hit by dodging back towards the water. His landing was worsened when his foot slipped off of an exposed root and sent him sprawling backwards, landing half in the water. He heard Sakura's shout behind him and pushed himself the rest of the way into the stream as his teammates approached. Unfortunately, his escape was halted by the monster. The moment Naruto resurfaced on the other side of the stream, it took a running leap and managed to clear the expanse and land on the shore in front of Naruto. Naruto rolled to the side and bounced back onto his feet as the monster moved towards him. Behind him he could hear one of his teammates swimming towards him, and footsteps told him that another must have been running towards the shallower part to run across and help him. Hoping he was right, Naruto took off in that direction. He had only made it 3 steps when the monster's arm smacked him in the side and into a tree. He tried to brace himself for the impact, but his head snapped backwards and hit the trunk hard before bouncing back off and landing in a heap on the ground. Once Naruto went down, the monster veered off into the trees with Sasuke and Sakura right behind him. They pursued the monster for several meters before it suddenly disappeared. They listened intently, hoping for a clue to its presence, and when nothing came they turned back and headed back towards Naruto, wondering why he hadn't followed them. The two reached the shore and Sakura started to panic when she didn't see Naruto anywhere. "Did he take off again?" she asked, turning towards Sasuke. The Uchiha's response was to roll his eyes at her and point to the opposite shore where Naruto had collapsed. "He swam over there and then fainted," Sakura stated in disbelief, moving back towards the shallow neck again. "Let's just get him back to camp. When he wakes up you can yell at him and then we'll train," Sasuke responded. When Naruto finally revived, Sakura had already set 3 fish on the fire and she and Sasuke were finishing up their spar. He blinked at his surroundings in confusion and reached to touch the back of his head. It should have been bruised, but he felt no tenderness in the area. "Oh, finally you're awake," Sakura said, walking towards him. "I don't know what you were thinking by running off last night, but if this morning is anything to go by then we'll fail unless we keep you with us at all times, because it seems like the only thing you're good at is catching fish and getting yourself into trouble." Naruto glared at her and moved to retort before thinking better of it and turning away with a sigh. Sakura blinked at the easy victory but let it go. If Naruto wasn't going to argue, it would make things run much more smoothly. "You and Sasuke should spar and then we will. After that, we'll do our laps and maybe look around a bit more," she added. "What happened?" "Excuse me?" Sakura asked. "What happened? What do you mean, what happened? What do you think happened? You fainted on the other side of the river after running away instead of following to help us track that thing down," she told him. Naruto shook his head, frowning as his eyes squinted shut. All he could remember was hitting the tree. Sakura only rolled her eyes at his behavior and snapped her fingers in front of his face to get his attention. "Go spar against Sasuke. We need to get this stuff done or Kakashi-sensei will get angry." "Pervert won't get angry. He's doing this because if we die he doesn't have to teach us," Naruto signed. Sakura gave him a blank look of confusion and he turned away, pushing himself to his feet. "This is going to be a long 2 weeks.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.